Chapter 507. She was unconscious for a few months before she slowly regained some of her strength. At that time, this master of the Omega Kotoku, who had raised her like a small animal, would come over to tease her when he was happy. If he was unhappy, he would leave her there for 2 days and 3 nights, starving her to the point that her eyes almost turned white. In order to tame this little pet of his, this master had tried to starve her for 5 days, not letting her drink a single drop of water. He wanted her to call him master. She had always rolled her eyes at him, stubbornly refusing to submit to this title. At that time, her 4 limbs were completely immobile, and after 5 days, not only was she almost out of shape, she was so dirty that her original appearance was almost unrecognizable. When she thought of this, Xiao Mu shuddered deeply. When he thought of her and came over, she was struggling to use her head to tap the ground, just like a dirty loach, slowly crawling in a sullen manner. She wanted to die. She didn't want to live like this. However, at that time, even death seemed like an extravagant hope. He only needed to lift a finger to obstruct her, and everything would become meaningless. She really didn't care for this kind of humiliating life, but death was so difficult. Now, it would never be like this again. It wouldn't. That year, he had been so desperate and yet he still couldn't tame her. Now, he wanted to order her around and teach her how to behave. In his dreams of 1,000 years. "I told you to stop, didn't you hear me?" Kai Wei shouted. Seeing that the little girl didn't respond, she couldn't help but get angry and anxious. She rushed forward and stretched out a hand to grab her. Arbor reflexively swung his fist, and with a bang, it heavily smashed onto Kai Wei's deformed little face. Kai Wei covered her red and swollen left eye, and when she brought Arbor back to Blue Mountain Courtyard, it was almost dusk. The courtyard was full of orioles and swallows gathered there, eating melon seeds and chatting. When they saw Kai Wei enter, they hurriedly greeted her with smiles. "Sister Kai Wei, you're back." "Hello, Sister Kai Wei." "Sister Kai Wei, you're back so late today." Blue Mountain Courtyard was in charge of all the maidservants in the outer courtyard of the Qin estate. Kai Wei could be considered an old member of the Qin estate. She was about 25 or 26 years old, and was now the assistant steward of Blue Mountain Courtyard. Above her, there was also a senior steward. When the crowd saw Kai Wei put down her hand, revealing a panda eye, they could not help but look at each other in dismay. In the Qin estate, apart from the personal maidservants of the master, madam, and young master, almost all the other maidservants were respectful to Sister Kai Wei. Who was so audacious? Sister Tsai Wei's eyes were swollen. Kai Wei did not utter a word. She only turned to Arbor with a gloomy face and said, "You'll be staying in the 3rd room in the 2nd row on the north side." Everyone's gazes uniformly turned towards the stoic-faced little girl, their eyes carrying a mischievous smile as if they were watching a show. Arbor didn't waste any time. He took his card and walked towards his residence. He didn't walk far before he stopped and glanced back. "Come out." A plump figure jogged over. It was the fat girl who had entered the residence with her on the same day. You're really going to that room?" The fat girl looked at her in horror. "HM." The fat girl hastily ran over and stood still before panting. "They said that there are strange noises coming from the 3rd room in the 2nd row on the north side every night. They said that a maidservant hung herself in that room before, so it's very likely that it's haunted." "Oh." The little girl nodded. "Thank you for telling me. You're not scared?" The fat girl stared. Chapter 508. Arbor shook her head. She even had the courage to face the holy water sect again with its desolation and rubble. There was nothing in this world that could make her afraid. "And my name is Xiang Yuan Yuan. What about you, little sister?" The chubby girl revealed a simple and honest smile as she looked eagerly at this little girl who looked very ordinary but had a pair of extremely cold and beautiful eyes. "Mu Xiao Bao, Arbor said softly. Oh, you're called Xiaobao. Xiang Yuanyuan cracked a smile. Then you live alone in that haunted house. If you're scared in the middle of the night, you can come find me. I live in the 4th room in the row in front of your room. Xiang Yuanyuan scratched her head as she said this and chuckled. We have 4 sisters in the room, and they're all quite easy to talk to. If you're scared and sneak over to us in the middle of the night, no one will tell on you to Sister Kai Wei. Arbor nodded slightly, indicating that she understood. Xiang Yuanyuan pointed in the direction of her room. Then I'll go back first. Oh right, dinner is at the dining hall, so don't come too late. If you come too late, there won't be any food. Thank you for the reminder, Arbor responded, and the 2 of them went back to their rooms. Of the 4 rooms in the 2nd row in the north, the 3 on the left and right were empty utility rooms, and only the 3rd room was for her to use. It seemed like that whatever ghost caused all the rooms in this row to be deserted. When she opened the door, darling Xiao nearly fainted from the musty smell. How long had it been since someone lived here? They wanted her to live in such a shabby room. Humph, these people wanted to harm her and make her stay in this room with bad air for a long time. She wouldn't do as they wished. After closing the door, Arbor had the sapling drag her into Paradise Planet and personally ran to the vegetable field to pick 2 cabbages. She planned to cook a cabbage pot and make do with a meal. Master, put down the pot in your hand. Let me do it. The little tray ant ran over and shouted loudly. Last time, when Master cooked noodles, not only did the bottom of the pot get cooked through, but the peach forest was also filled with smoke. The sapling was so scared that it thought a fire was about to break out. Master clearly had the all-purpose food box that contained many dishes from various restaurants, but she liked to cook by herself. How intoxicating! However, there was one time when Chio clearly heard its master muttering to himself as he held the small pot and asked what he should cook every day. Only then would it feel a little smoky. His heart instantly ached for Chio. Master was missing home. At this moment, Arbor chuckled. Knowing that he was in the wrong, he threw down the small pot in his hand. Chio was much more pleasing to the eye now. It could cultivate medicinal herbs, plant vegetables, harvest vegetables, and pick fruits. Now, it could even cook a simple pot of stew. It was indeed useful. It was better than her piercing the bottom of the pot. In the past, when she saw her mother and Xiao Yao cook, they could simply casually make several dishes. It felt especially difficult in her hands. She ran to the open space behind the peach forest. The sapling had built 3 large warehouses there. One was for medicinal herbs, another was for vegetables harvested from the field, and the last was for peaches. In front of the warehouse, there were 2 carriages full of fruits. This was the first time second uncle had used her guide fee to bring back things. Until now, they had only eaten a few fruits, and the 2 carriages were still full. Arbor went forward and took a bunch of grapes. She cut 20 to 30 of them and threw them into a small basket. Just as she was about to wash them by the lake, she stopped in her tracks. Chapter 509. She tilted her small head and looked at her palm. With a thought, a clear and lustrous stream of water emerged from her fingers. The little water child Jian said that with her current cultivation, it wasn't a big problem for her to control a trickle of water under normal circumstances. If she wanted to launch a big move like the one she tried last time, she would need to mobilize all the mystic energy in her body. She would probably only be able to launch that one move before her mystic energy was exhausted. She directly washed the grapes and Arbor took a bite out of one. The fruit that had been stored on Paradise Planet for so long was still fresh and delicious. Compared to ordinary grapes, it was more or less mixed with a bit of mystic energy. The sweetness and coolness of the fruit went straight to the heart. Back then, when she chased the little water child away, she had cried until the world shook and gods wept. Her tears flowed endlessly, so the water quality of the entire paradise planet was completely improved by the little water child. As a result, all the peach trees planted by the lakeside all bore peaches, and each one was bigger and juicier than the other. In these 2 years, the peach trees bore several batches of fruit, which were all plucked by the little tray ants and stuffed into the storehouse. Last time, Chocho even complained that there were so many peaches in the storehouse that it almost couldn't hold them all. But it made sense. The total area of the peach trees on her paradise planet was probably close to 100 mu. They grew especially exuberantly near water sources. Chocho even built a large storehouse. If they were outside, the storehouse would probably be full after one harvest. However, there weren't too many types of medicinal herbs, and the entire storehouse wasn't even filled with 1/5 of them. Arbor ate and ate as she strolled to her own medicinal garden. After inspecting it, she saw that all kinds of medicinal herbs were thriving in the 7 to 8 mu of medicinal fields. She had gathered all the poisonous herbs together to prevent them from touching the others and spoiling their medicinal properties. However, there were still too few precious medicinal herbs, so there really weren't many kinds of medicinal powders and liquids that she could grind and bring out. The green radish poison liquid and the green radish pill were considered one kind. The detoxification pill was also pretty good. Normal poisons were basically cured immediately. There was a relatively rare medicinal pill that she made from longevity flowers, the longevity pill. Based on her conjecture, if mystic cultivators below level 10 consumed it, their lifespan would increase by at least 2 to 3 years. However, this longevity pill could only be taken once. It would be ineffective even if it was taken more than once. If it was taken over a long period of time, it would at most help to recuperate one's body. It would allow one to be completely free of illness and pain for a period of time. Speaking of which, the medicinal properties were quite impressive. If she encountered a level 9 mystic cultivator who was stuck at a bottleneck, she would be able to break through to become a great level 10 mystic cultivator in 2 or 3 years by relying on this pill. In that case, the upper limit of his lifespan of close to 100 years would be completely raised. As long as a great level 10 mystic cultivator didn't court death, it wouldn't be a problem for them to live for at least 120 to 130 years. The lifespan of an ordinary person was only 70 to 80 years, which was already considered a long lifespan. Most importantly, Arbor's longevity pill was effective even for ordinary people. Arbor was in a state of seclusion. In her previous life, she had also heard that there were different grades of alchemists, and the quality of the pills they produced was also very different. He just didn't know what grade of pill the longevity pill in her hand was. Last time, when she had Qinghuan try it, that fellow's eyes lit up after eating it and only told her that the taste was pretty good. Was she asking how it tasted? What a baffling fellow. Chapter 510. The other type was the hemostatic ointment, made from the hemostatic grass grown from the hemostatic grass that second uncle gave her. However, her hemostatic ointment was different from the ones sold on the market. The hemostatic ointment on the market required about 5 minutes to completely stop the bleeding. Her ointment could basically stop the bleeding in minutes. The effect was basically similar to the secret ointment that the Crown Prince applied on her hand when she first met him. In fact, the effect was even better. However, she was too lazy to make it, so she only tried making 2 small jars of this hemostatic ointment and was unwilling to make it. As for the other types of medicinal powders, she had used stone medicine rollers to make them, but she only made 2 types. Moreover, their effects were only ordinary poisonous powders that were effective on mystic cultivators level 6 or level 7 and below. She couldn't even be bothered to name them. In her current opinion, this kind of poisonous powder was basically not very effective. Her current opponents were all great mystic cultivators level 10 and above, so it was a waste of effort to make them. To put it bluntly, it was still because there were too few medicinal herbs. Only 7 to 8 mu of medicinal herbs were planted in the 30 mu of medicinal fields, not even 1/3 of the total. After returning from her inspection, she felt quite satisfied with everything. She then went back to the tree house and fed the little white squirrel a few mouthfuls of life-prolonging medicinal liquid. After hugging it for a while, she turned back to the peach forest. This life-prolonging medicinal liquid could guarantee that Chirpy would not lack vitality for 2 to 3 days. Even if it was not depleted, it would not affect its little life. Her pitiful little squirrel didn't even know when it would wake up. When she returned to the open space in front of the peach forest, she saw the little tray ant holding a medium-sized pot of cabbage and meat slices and bouncing toward her. Looking at the steaming pot of cabbage and meat slices, Arbor subconsciously sniffed. Her eyes flickered slightly, and she quickly jogged to Chio-Chio. She reached out to pick it up and took the pot in passing. "Thank you, Chio-Chio. Thank you for always being so tolerant and accompanying me. You are an indispensable companion in my life." "Master, what are you saying? There's no need to thank me for such a small matter." Chio-Chio blinked its black beady eyes and looked at her adorably. The corners of Arbor's mouth twitched slightly. He had already sat down cross-legged, picked up 2 bamboo chopsticks, and started eating in small bites. Actually, she didn't eat much. How could one person finish an entire pot of food? However, she liked the smell of cooking on this paradise planet. She liked to see the smoke rising from the kitchen. It was as if home was right in front of her. "Master, is it delicious?" "It's delicious." Arbor nodded. He didn't say that Chio-Chio had forgotten to add salt again. Well, it was better than her boiling through the bottom of the pot. "Master, someone is coming." Chio-Chio's perception had improved quite a bit, so she could immediately detect any danger approaching within a few kilometers. Arbor sneered and put 2 pieces of meat into his mouth with his chopsticks. "Don't worry about it. Let them be." Not even a third of the pot of cabbage and meat was finished. Darling Qiao couldn't bear to throw away the rest. It was shameful to waste food. Since it wouldn't spoil in the paradise, he closed the lid and climbed into the treehouse. He hugged the little white squirrel and slept soundly. The next day, when Omega Kotoku received news that a group of rooms in Blue Mountain Courtyard had caught fire and a maid had been burned to death, her heart couldn't help but skip a beat. She hurriedly rushed to Blue Mountain Courtyard with her men and found Kai Wei to scold her. Her face darkened as she asked, "Where is she?" Chapter 511. Young Master. Kai Wei was on the verge of tears as she curtsied and said, "Kai Wei doesn't know what happened. Everything was fine last night. Let me ask you, where is the Xiao Bao that I asked you to bring over to educate yesterday?" Kai Wei's face was pale, and her body was on the verge of collapsing. She was in a state where she was on the verge of fainting. With a thump, she knelt on the ground and repeatedly kowtowed as she begged for mercy. This servant had Mu Xiao Bao stay in one of the rooms in this row, but for some reason, a fire broke out last night. It's very possible that Mu Xiao Bao didn't light the candle properly and didn't even know that it caught on fire. We put out the fire with great difficulty, but we didn't see Mu Xiao Bao at all. I don't know if she slept like a log last night and didn't come out. Now it's burnt to ashes. Kai Wei's voice became softer and softer, as if she didn't dare to look at the second young master's murderous gaze. "I asked you to bring her back to educate her. You actually caused her to disappear." Omega Kotoku flew into a rage and kicked Kai Wei's shoulder. Kai Wei screamed and suddenly fell to the ground. She felt as if the bones in her shoulder had been shattered and the pain caused her tears to flow out. She was really wronged to death. She had brought the little girl back from the second young master's place and suffered a punch from the little girl the moment she stepped out of the door. She wanted revenge and purposely arranged for her to stay in this remote and haunted room. But she had never thought of burning her to death. Although her heart was filled with jealousy, she knew that the second young master valued this girl. She wasn't an idiot and already knew that the second young master had kicked the girl over to her side to educate her in a fit of anger. He would definitely bring her back 2 days later. Even if she had 10 times the guts, she wouldn't dare to secretly kill the little girl. Elder sister, why did you make the second young master so angry? You really shouldn't have done that. A soft chuckle sounded in his ears. He saw a well-developed woman around the age of 20 walking over slowly behind an old woman with a head full of white hair who was walking at a fast pace. When Kai Wei saw her face, she immediately understood everything. She bared her teeth and screamed with a purple and white face, "Kai Lan, you're the one who harmed me. You started the fire." "Io, ba, 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 ba. Elder sister, don't talk nonsense. Why would I set a fire for no reason?" Kai Lan covered her mouth and chuckled lightly. When she noticed the cold gaze her young master shot at her, she immediately didn't dare act rashly, and she knelt down with an aggrieved expression before she cried and said, "Young master, you have to uphold justice for Kai Lan." Her sister was accusing her wrongly. How would Kai Lan know that her elder sister brought back a little maid last night? There's no reason to start a fire. You were the one who did it. Kai Wei shrieked, "You wanted to harm me. You set the fire. You want to frame me. Shut up." Granny Hong, the chief steward of Blue Mountain Courtyard, shouted coldly. His eyes swept over Kai Wei and Kai Lan with a dignified look before he stepped forward and bowed to young master Omega Kotoku. "Please forgive me, second young master. It's this old servant who doesn't know how to teach this servant. I've troubled second young master." Omega Kotoku's eyes were so gloomy that tears could drip from them. He looked at Granny Hong and said coldly, "You really don't know how to teach. By today, you have to find that person even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground. Otherwise, all of you can die for me." Granny Hong's body trembled, and her gaze instantly became nervous. Kai Lan also widened her eyes in disbelief, practically unable to believe her own ears. "Babies, I'll give you 4 chapters first. I'll give you 4 chapters tonight. The author is still working and will be home later. Moi." Chapter 5:12. The young master actually wanted to execute them, the Blue Mountain Courtyard stewards who had served their master for many years, for a mere lowly servant. Kai Lan widened her eyes in horror, and cold sweat trickled down her forehead. Why was it like this? The second young master actually cared so much about that lowly servant. What did she do wrong? Although Kai Lan hadn't served the second young master closely, she was extremely intelligent and had her own way of dealing with people. She understood this second young master too well. He looked like he didn't care about anything, but once he set his eyes on something, he would use any means possible to obtain it. The second young master had a trace of bigotry hidden in the depths of his bones. Right now, the second young master's bigotry was completely reflected on this lowly servant. The second young master, he wasn't joking. If they really couldn't find this lowly servant, or if the lowly servant really burned to death in this room, then only death awaited them. When she thought of this, Cylon's entire body quivered. Cold sweat trickled down her forehead like rain, and her complexion became increasingly ghastly pale. She had really made a mistake. Originally, she only wanted to use this matter to get rid of that damn woman, Kai Wei, but she didn't expect the second young master to value that lowly servant so much. This truly exceeded her expectations. Then, she heard a cold and cheerless voice interject and ask frostily, "Why are you all crowding around my door? Move aside." When this voice landed in the ears of the Blue Mountain Courtyard maids, it was tantamount to the sound of nature. Kai Lan turned around with an incredulous expression. Yet Kai Wei abruptly turned back with tears in her eyes. When she saw the young lady dressed in the same pink maid uniform slowly walking over, she abruptly felt that the usually arrogant stoic-faced young lady didn't seem so repulsive at this moment. The Blue Mountain courtyard maids all sighed in relief and hastily opened up a path for Arbor to pass through. Our dear Xiao Mu walked to the gloomy second young master and cast him a glance without uttering a word. "Where did you go?" The second young master's face was filled with anger. Inexplicable. Omega Kotoku always felt that he was especially composed in the past. Even when faced with his sly brother's sarcasm, he could still turn a blind eye. But now, his good temper had been completely worn away by the stoic face. He didn't know why, but looking at the stoic face made him want to get angry. Xiao Mu harumphed and said coldly, "Is that kind of dilapidated house that exudes a musty smell for people to live in? The Qin estate can't afford to build a decent wing, so they might as well not hire so many maids. Do I look like I have such low standards? How can I live in a rundown house?" Looking at the little stoic's disdainful face, for some reason, Sir Omega Kotoku felt especially humiliated. Was his Qin estate that poor? Omega Kotoku glared coldly at the trembling Kai Wei who was sprawled on the ground. "Go and receive your punishment on behalf of the court." A servant who acted on her own initiative. He only wanted her to teach the little stoic some etiquette on his behalf, not to torture her in terms of food and clothing. Was he, the Omega Kotoku, such a low-class person? Yes. Kai Wei scrambled and crawled away, staggering as she rolled away. She was really scared. She warned herself 10,000 times in her heart to learn from today's lesson and not offend this stoic-faced young lady again in the future. "Come with me." Omega Kotoku snapped coldly and turned to walk out of Blue Mountain courtyard. The little fellow followed after him in a huff. Before she left, she gave Xiang Yuanyuan, who was hiding in the crowd, a look. Chapter 513. Xiang Yuanyuan was taken aback for a moment, and without hesitation, she strode forward and followed him. Not long after the two left Blue Mountain courtyard, Arbor pulled Xiang Yuanyuan behind a nearby bush and stared at her. "You're very hungry." Xiang Yuanyuan was just about to shake her head when her stomach let out a disappointing rumble. Actually, even though Arbor was standing so far away earlier, she could hear Xiang Yuanyuan's stomach rumbling with hunger. Xiang Yuanyuan's big face was covered in a layer of red mist. In front of a little girl who was 10 years younger than her, her stomach was rumbling with hunger. Xiang Yuanyuan was embarrassed and her face was flushed red. Arbor got Chiochio to take out the steaming cabbage pot and stuffed it into Xiang Yuanyuan's hands. "You can have it, but I've already eaten a portion of it. If you don't like it." How could she dislike it? The aroma of the cabbage pot stimulated Xiang Yuanyuan's big belly to rumble. She practically snatched the pot into her arms. When she looked up, her face was red as she said embarrassedly, I'll get a bowl to scoop some." "No need, you can have it all." Arbor glanced at Xiang Yuanyuan's stomach and shook her head. "You're really giving it all to me?" Xiang Yuanyuan's bright black eyes were filled with pleasant surprise. She then scratched her head in embarrassment and said, I went to the big dining hall last night and it wasn't too late. I don't know why I only got half a bowl of porridge." She was so hungry that her stomach rumbled in the middle of the night. She tossed and turned and couldn't sleep well at all. "It's a bit bland. Do you want to add some salt?" No need. It's fine like this." Xiang Yuanyuan held the cabbage pot and felt like she was holding the whole world. Her face was filled with bliss. Arbor was a little drunk. It was just a pot of cabbage stewed with meat. His happy face made her feel a little sour. The little stoic's gaze relaxed slightly. She glanced at the eldest miss and said with a nod, "Then you should hide a bit." Xiang Yuanyuan was just an ordinary person with slightly greater strength. She didn't have an inner world. If she openly carried this cabbage pot back, who knew how many people would covet it? Arbor didn't want to cause any trouble for her, so he kindly reminded her. Xiang Yuanyuan immediately understood and nodded. Xiang Yuanyuan wasn't stupid. She took off her outer robe and wrapped it around the pot. After repeatedly thanking him, she happily went to find a place to eat. Arbor turned around and saw the second young master standing under a snow plum tree in full bloom not far away, looking at her with an indecipherable expression. She did not know how long he had been staring at her. He was dressed in a long blue robe and had a head full of black hair. He was truly a peerless young master. When that pair of emerald eyes looked at her, there was a trace of an indescribably strange emotion in them. She slowly walked over. Omega Katoku stared at her as she walked closer to him. Suddenly, he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Have we met before? He asked softly, as if he was murmuring. Arbor was greatly shaken on the inside, but she still maintained that stoic face on the surface and walked around him expressionlessly. She didn't give him a single word in response. Of course, Omega Katoku didn't need her to respond. He just treated it as if his brain had gone haywire for no reason, so she didn't hear him murmuring softly. The two of them wandered back to Crane Garden through a small path. That night, Arbor jumped out of the window and secretly snuck into Omega Katoku's study to search for some information. According to her observations these past few days, the Qin estate was a medicinal pill patrician family that was passionate about pill research. Chapter 514. The family head, Qin Guelu, spent his days in the pill concocting room and was nowhere to be seen. The second madam, Yang Liuxiu, wasn't the two young masters' biological mother. She had been married for 5 years, but she still had a niece and nephew from the Yang family by her side. Everyone in the estate addressed her as young master cousin and young miss cousin, but she had absolutely nothing to do with the two young masters. Was Shuntian Prefecture's Luigi related to the Qin estate? That day, when the old sect master dragged him into the sky and self-detonated, she detected that he hadn't died from the shattered life lantern. However, with his injuries from back then, he probably wouldn't recover without resting for a year or two. If he wasn't related to the Qin estate, why would the Qin estate's iron tablet appear in the Holy Water sect's ancestral hall? Xiao Mu sneered and sped up the flipping speed in her hands. During the day, Omega Katoku was sitting on the side, so she couldn't do anything. Only now. Master, someone's approaching. Chio's voice instantly rang in her mind. Arbor immediately jumped out of the window and nimbly and soundlessly scuttled out, hiding her body in a patch of undergrowth outside. The branches and leaves of the sapling extended from her wrist, emitting a faint green light. After a few seconds, Arbor's entire body was enveloped by the rapidly growing undergrowth, concealing all of her presence. Young master, what happened? I seem to have sensed someone here just now. Omega Katoku lit a candle. The candlelight illuminated his slightly furrowed brows. He scanned his surroundings but didn't discover anything. His personal bodyguard sighed in relief and couldn't help but laugh. Who would dare to cause trouble at the Qin estate? Young master, you're worrying too much. You should return early to rest. Arbor crouched below the window and couldn't help but relax when she saw Omega Katoku leave. A moment later, she nimbly flipped into the study again and methodically searched through Omega Katoku's study at an extremely fast speed. She left empty-handed with a frown. She did not directly return to her room to rest, but instead quietly left the Crane Garden. Her figure flashed nimbly in the dark night. When he arrived at a place called Fugui Garden, his small ears twitched slightly as he heard a woman's muffled voice coming from behind the door. Xiao Mu's eyelids twitched. She wasn't stupid. Even if she hadn't experienced anything in her previous life, she had still grown up. Even if she hadn't eaten pork, she would have unintentionally seen pigs run. Just as she was about to run away, she heard the woman snort and shout, "You damned ghost, why are you so strong? Do you want to kill me? If by any chance I cry out and master hears it, you'll die." A young man chuckled and said, "Auntie, don't make a sound. Otherwise, neither of us will be able to escape death." Xiao Mu felt her scalp go numb when she heard this. She didn't dare to stay any longer. She felt goosebumps all over her body and hurriedly ran out. After coming out, her small body couldn't help but tremble a little. She hurriedly slipped into another courtyard. Two figures were reflected in the study. The little fellow was wrapped in trees and transformed into a little treant to hide under the window. An old man's voice could be heard from inside the room. He said vaguely, "The situation has been particularly tense recently. That person is currently searching everywhere for you. You should let your master hide for a while longer. That lunatic has been clinging on to us and refusing to let go. We have to take care of him." Another slightly familiar young voice said through gritted teeth, "Sir wishes for you to do something for us. After it's done, you definitely won't be short of benefits." Chapter 5:15. After that, there were a few whispers. Arbor only heard the words, "pill recipe," and "secret recipe." She couldn't hear anything else, so she couldn't help but feel a little anxious. "No way, no way. You can't implicate our Qin estate." The aged voice refused again and again. "If something happens to that person in our estate, then our entire estate won't be able to escape the blame. It'll definitely be a serious crime that will lead to the extermination of our entire family. You're still afraid of that muddle-headed old guy? What can he do? As long as this young one is dealt with, that old one is nothing to be afraid of. That won't do." The aged voice faintly revealed some anger. "You want to burn our Qin estate on a bonfire? I definitely can't agree to that. Family head Qin, don't forget that you and I are on the same path, tied to the same boat. If we're completely wiped out, you." The voice in the room lowered again. Finally, the aged voice said helplessly, "Can you really guarantee that our Qin estate will be able to escape unscathed? After dealing with that person, the old one will definitely be at a loss of what to do. At that time, we'll..." After another round of whispers, Arbor could only be secretly anxious. She kept feeling a trace of discomfort in the bottom of her heart, faintly feeling uncomfortable. What kind of person would secretly harm become a serious crime that would lead to the extermination of their entire family? This answer practically leapt into her mind. It was the person she had always refused to think about and didn't dare to face in these 2 years. Come to think of it, she was really a star of calamity through and through. Almost all the people who were good to her were dead. She had been conflicted for a long time before she finally decided to come out into the world. She had even decided to make a trip home. On the way back, she flipped through those letters. That kind of longing to return home urged her, and she almost wanted to run back immediately. However, the closer she was to home, the more timid she felt. Perhaps, she was actually resisting going back from the bottom of her heart. It was best if she didn't go back and break the peace of her family. Even without her, her family had been living well all these years. From their letters, she could see the happiness in their hearts. She, this little star of calamity, was actually more suitable. It would be best if she stayed alone and didn't bother anyone. Losing something was really scary. Arbor returned to his room in the Crane Garden in an upset mood. As soon as he entered the door, he couldn't help but stagnate and take 2 steps back. A slender figure suddenly grabbed her wrist and said in a cold voice, "Where did you go for a stroll in the middle of the night?" Arbor's body stiffened. He felt as if a poisonous snake had grabbed his wrist. That hand was as cold as it was in his previous life. With a flip of his hand, Arbor quickly got rid of his hand and ruthlessly kicked over, mercilessly leaving a small footprint on the man's body. Omega Kotoku didn't retreat. He lowered his head and looked at the footprint on his leg. His eyes stared gloomily at the expressionless face under the moonlight. "Who are you? Show me your face. Get out." Xiao Mu found him annoying and kicked him again, kicking him out of the room. She then slammed the door shut and slammed it shut right in front of his face. Bang! That sound almost startled the entire crane garden. A guard in black floated over and looked at the tightly shut door in astonishment. He then looked at his second young master, who had an extremely ugly expression, and couldn't help but gulp. "I've been very busy these few days. I already said that I'll finish it even if it's later. But you don't have to wait for me. You can read it tomorrow." Chapter 5:16. The young master was given the cold shoulder for no reason, so why did he want to laugh so much? Omega Kotoku gloomily turned to glance at the black-clothed guard, only to see the guard's solemn expression, even though he was already cramping up from laughter on the inside, that the little stoic wrapped herself in the blankets and tossed and turned the entire night without sleeping well. The next day, when she went out with a yawn, she saw Omega Kotoku standing in the courtyard with a glance. It actually snowed last night. Omega Kotoku was wearing a white fox fur overcoat as he stood in the middle of the boundless snow. His fine black hair was splashed with ink, and his thin lips were slightly pursed. When he turned to look at her, it was as if a lifetime had passed. This person couldn't have been standing in the corridor the entire night after he kicked her out, right? Was there something wrong with his brain? "Let's go." He took a furry fur overcoat from the guard beside him and wanted to drape it over her. However, the little stoic didn't appreciate his kindness and evaded to the side, looking at him vigilantly. He glanced at her and actually didn't get angry. He handed the fur overcoat to her and let her drape it over herself. The weather was indeed quite cold, so she simply draped it over herself and tied a knot on the silk sash at the collar. It was already nearing the new year, and the Chin estate was also busy with business, so she didn't know where this second young master wanted to take her. Last night, she was actually unreasonable. At that time, her mood was in a mess, and she even flew into a rage out of humiliation, so she unreasonably kicked this second young master out the door. If it was any other young master, they would probably drag this audacious maidservant out and beat her to death. He had clearly already exposed her identity and even saw through her disguise. But why didn't he say anything today and continue to keep her by his side? Arbor couldn't figure it out and followed him to a pavilion with thick cotton curtains hanging on it. As soon as they entered, they felt a warmth hit them in the face. The charcoal inside the stove was burning red. The maidservants obediently took the fur coats from the two and led them to the window on the second floor. There were already many exquisite pastries and food on the small table. This should be a sumptuous breakfast. The two of them ate breakfast in silence. Arbor felt that she had a good appetite, but Omega Kotoku, who was sitting opposite her, kept looking at her with a frown. "Eat more." The second young master rolled up his wide sleeves and picked up his chopsticks to give the little stoic another piece of pastry. This scene made the maids who were secretly observing them drop their chins one after another. They secretly lowered their heads and couldn't help but peep at them from the corner of their eyes. Heavens, young master actually picked up food for that little maid? Just what kind of divine being was this little maid? How could she have such great fortune? No matter how they looked, that girl was wearing the same pink dress as them. No one would believe that she wasn't a maid. However, an even more horrifying scene unfolded before their eyes. The little stoic picked up that pastry touched by Omega Kotoku and directly threw it on the table. She pursed her lips in displeasure. "I'm full." The maidservants were afraid that the young master would fly into a rage the next instant and hastily knelt down. Omega Kotoku picked up another piece of sugar pastry and placed it on her small plate, but it was thrown away by the little girl again. Omega Kotoku picked up all the food and realized that the little girl didn't eat a single bite. He guessed that she really was full, so he finally stopped. However, the maidservants around him were so frightened that they trembled all over. None of them dared to look up again. "Withdraw, all of you," young master Omega Kotoku said coldly. The rustling of robes brushed against the ground, and soon, the maidservants retreated from the second floor of the pavilion one after another. Chapter 5:17. Let's get to know each other again. Omega Kotoku said indifferently, my name is Qin Xian. What about you? Mu Xiao Bao. Even I feel a bit scared when I look at myself in the mirror expressionlessly. Omega Kotoku nodded and didn't expose her fake name. He said indifferently, Xiao Bao, you don't have to be so guarded against me. My Qin estate doesn't have any shady dealings. You can stay and investigate for as long as you want. Don't worry, I won't mention this to anyone. Omega Kotoku's sleeves swept across the table as he poured her a cup of tea and pushed it in front of her. Arbor looked at this Qin estate's second young master in bewilderment. She didn't know what this person was planning. Was there anything shady? Last night, your father was still plotting with someone in the middle of the night. Could it be that this Omega Kotoku didn't know anything? She subconsciously wanted to hit her little head. She felt that this life was a bit strange. It was poles apart from her previous life. Many things caught her unprepared and she didn't have time to prepare. In her previous life, she was taken away by that bastard Fan Chioha when she was around 20 and tortured for 2 years. When she was 22, she was taken away by this master, in front of her and followed by master, for at least 4 years. She didn't know the person in front of her very well, but she was at least somewhat familiar with him. He was a stubborn person to the point of being paranoid. His character was strict. Just by looking at his methods of taming beasts, one could tell. At that time, she was even more closed off than now. She was a cripple who couldn't move her limbs. She stayed in a fixed place all day long, eating, drinking, and going to the toilet together. She didn't have the slightest bit of dignity and didn't want to care about anything else. She only knew that the place she stayed at that time wasn't the Qin estate. Moreover, she didn't know where she was at that time, but it definitely wasn't in Guanlan City. Perhaps he had already opened his own estate and lived elsewhere at that time. Now, her meeting with Omega Kotoku had been brought forward by 7 or 8 years. This was an irresistible fate, the people who should meet would meet as usual. But now, her fate was completely in her own hands. No one could control it. She was. Not yet. Come on. Arbor held the warm teacup with both hands and glanced at the man in front of him coldly and distantly. He lowered his head slightly. The second young master's heart skipped a beat. For some reason, when he saw the little stoic's expressionless face and ice-cold eyes, he felt extremely uncomfortable in his heart. He really wanted to reach out and warm her eyes. Young master. The chief steward's voice suddenly sounded from outside the door. What is it? Regarding old master's birthday banquet, there are still some important guest list that I need to discuss with second young master. Yes. Omega Kotoku stood up and stared at the little fellow who had her head lowered. You go back to Crane Garden first. I'll be back later. As he walked out, he said lightly, it's cold on the road. Remember to put on your fur coat. Arbor raised his head and glanced out the window. He saw him coming down the stairs and leaving the pavilion. At some point in time, snow started drifting down from the sky again. The accompanying chief steward bowed respectfully and held up an umbrella for him. Arbor also stood up and walked downstairs. When she passed by the staircase, a maidservant handed her a fur coat with her head lowered. Arbor thanked her and accepted it. She casually put it on and went down the pavilion, heading outside. Chapter 5:18. A small layer of snow had accumulated on the ground from last night. With her cultivation, it was normal for her to leave no traces when she stepped on the snow. However, Arbor purposely left a row of small footprints on the snow. Each step left a small footprint that formed a crooked row. As she walked, she thought about the steward's report and didn't notice a few figures passing through a small path nearby. The Qin estate's master's birthday banquet was on the list of important guests. Could it be that they wanted to add Prince Mo's name to it? Last night, the Qin estate's master and that person with a somewhat familiar voice, were they plotting against him? What methods did they plan to use to deal with him? Would the crown prince really come? He was busy with political affairs, so he shouldn't have to rush over to congratulate a mere Qin estate. She left a pair of small footprints on the snow as she thought, even if he really came, I wouldn't let anything happen to him. The little fellow reached out to touch her small face. She had disguised her appearance, so her face was ordinary. If she was thrown into a crowd, no one would recognize her. On the day of the birthday banquet, she would probably run into many acquaintances. As long as she didn't open her mouth to speak, no one would recognize her. The little fellow was very confident in her disguise technique. When the time came, she would be completely stupefied. Suddenly, she heard a soft chuckle beside her ear. Arbor turned her head and saw an exceptionally fine young master wearing a dark purple robe. His long hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a cinnabar mark between his eyebrows. He was leaning against a snow plum tree with a smile on his face, looking at the small crooked footprints she had purposely left behind. "Who are you?" Arbor asked coldly with a stoic face. "Impudent." A woman's soft reprimand came from beside the young master. Only then did Xiao Mu notice that there were several young and beautiful women of all shapes and sizes following behind this man. The one who spoke was wrapped in a large red woolen cloak. Her soft breasts were half exposed, and her body was round and voluptuous. Surrounded by pearls and jade, the woman's gaze landed enviously on the precious white fox fur coat that Xiao Mu was wearing. The woman's entire body carried a storm-like aura, as if she was going to devour Xiao Mu in the next instant. "You dare to be so rude in front of eldest young master? Little bitch, why aren't you kneeling down and saluting?" Another yellow-robed woman also came out from under the flowers and trees. She glared at Arbor and criticized repeatedly. Oh, so it was Grand Duke Qin Ziqin. No wonder there were some similarities between his features and second young master's. However, compared to the second young master's calm and collected appearance, this eldest young master Qin's eyes were alluring and contained a hint of frivolity and wickedness. He was obviously an insufferably flirtatious person. Arbor glanced at them and was about to turn around and leave when she saw eldest young master Qin's figure flash and appear beside her. He reached out to flirtatiously lift her small chin. Xiao Mu kicked him without allowing him to explain. At the same time that he reached out to grab her small foot, Xiao Mu abruptly retracted her foot. Her gaze hardened, and she backhanded his handsome face that was infuriatingly handsome. Qin Xian was caught off guard for a moment. He did not expect that a woman would actually make a move against him. He was instantly stupefied after being forcefully slapped by a little girl. The accompanying girls all screamed in shock, as if our dear Xiao Mu had done something deranged and unforgivable. Their screams nearly pierced her eardrums. Scram! Arbor kicked eldest young master angrily and pushed him away forcefully before turning to flee in a huff. Chapter 519. Qin Xian abruptly regained his wits, and his eyes flashed with fury as he anxiously chased after her. In less than a second, he once again blocked Arbor's path. "What, you want to run after hitting me? How can there be such a good thing?" He was so angry that his heart ached. Where did this little village girl come from? She had no manners at all. She actually dared to stage a full-on brawl and slap his face at the slightest disagreement. Preposterous. Young master, young master. The orioles and swallows all ran over in a huff and pointed at Arbor while shouting angrily. Noisy. Arbor turned around and sprinkled a large handful of medicinal powder at the orioles and swallows. The world suddenly quieted down. The few women raised their hands to cover their throats in horror. They only felt that after inhaling a mouthful of that poisonous powder, their throats were burning with pain. For a moment, they were completely speechless. Qin Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at Arbor. As the eldest young master of an elixir patrician family, he naturally knew a lot about medicine. He could tell at a glance that this little fellow's poison powder was pretty good and had remarkable effects. With this, the throats of the women in front of him probably wouldn't recover within 3 days, and they wouldn't be able to speak. This little fellow is a bit interesting. Eldest young Master Qin laughed instead of getting angry. His eyes swept over her face flippantly. How about this? How about I ask second brother to take you over? You can stay by my side from now on. The orioles and swallows around the eldest young master all widened their eyes in horror. However, none of them could make a sound at this moment and could only glare coldly and angrily at Arbor with tears in their eyes. Arbor's gaze didn't waver at all. He was as calm and tranquil as a 1,000-year-old dried-up well. He gazed at him coldly before turning to walk towards Crane Garden. Qin Xian's brows involuntarily creased. The little girl really wasn't good-tempered. Moreover, her eyes were filled with the coldness of the vicissitudes of life, which didn't match her age at all. You all go back first. The eldest young master threw down this sentence and headed straight for Crane Garden. The orioles and swallows, who had originally happily accompanied the eldest young master to admire the plum blossoms, were all on the verge of tears as they watched the eldest young master leave without any reluctance. They secretly gritted their teeth in hatred. The red-clothed beauty draped in a sheepskin coat stared at the young master's departing figure with resentment and anger in her eyes. The second young master had a daring maidservant. Almost everyone in the residence knew about this. But seeing her today, Ping Er felt that this woman was not only daring, but also willful and reckless. Eldest young master looked at the little slut's amused expression, and Ping Er's heart instantly ached. She understood the meaning of her man's gaze too well. It was a greedy look after something fun. Ping Er swore that she would never let this bitch enter Drizzlecourt. Absolutely not. Our dear Chiao Mu was so angry that her head hurt. After running all the way back to Crane Garden, she returned to her room and shut herself in. She didn't know that eldest young master, that debauchee, had directly run to second young master to demand her. Of course, in the end, the two brothers parted on bad terms. This matter reached the ears of the Qin estate's second madam, Yang Liuxiu, when it was close to evening. Her niece, Yang Fengyan, ran over to complain to her while weeping. She said that the two young masters had almost come to blows in Crane Garden over a lowly servant girl. At that time, Yang Liuxiu wondered if there was something wrong with her ears. Did she hear wrongly? Aunt. Yang Fengyan snuggled into Yang Liuxiu's embrace and sobbed. Chapter 520. Yang Liuxiu gently patted her niece's back, naturally aware of her niece's feelings for the second young master. Although she also wanted to play matchmaker for them, she had done so more than once in front of the master. Unfortunately, her niece's looks were similar to the Yang family's. They weren't stunning beauties, and her talent was very ordinary. She was still a level 4 mystic cultivator, so the second young master probably wouldn't fancy her. She had married into the Qin estate 5 years ago, and not long after, she had taken in her nephew and niece, whose parents had died early, and raised them under her care. She had treated them well from the bottom of her heart. In terms of food and clothing, they were no different from the two young masters of the Qin estate. However, it was still very difficult to marry Fengyan into the Qin estate. Not to mention the second young master's heavenly looks, his vision was naturally higher than normal people's. Moreover, their young family had been declining day by day these past few years, and they couldn't be compared to the Qin estate at all. Other than refining pills daily, Master Qin basically didn't care about his two sons. Sometimes, she even felt that Master Qin's laissez-faire attitude toward his two sons was almost unlike how he treated his own sons. Yang Liuxiu sighed and patted her niece's hand. Fengyan, our young family has been declining more and more these past 2 years. You also know that the Yang family doesn't have any promising descendants. If I hadn't helped them from time to time these past 2 years, their lives would have been even more difficult. As she spoke, she let out a long sigh. You better be mentally prepared for the matter between you and the second young master. Yang Fengyan's eyes abruptly widened, and her tear-streaked face was filled with unwillingness and anger. Aunt, you promised my aunt. You said that you would definitely make me marry into the Qin estate and marry second cousin. I don't want aunt, I won't marry anyone other than second cousin in this lifetime, aunt. You have to make a decision for me, aunt. Yang Fengyan had been raised by Madame Qin Nei Yang to have a very unruly personality. Once she heard that she couldn't get what she wanted, she naturally wouldn't give up. Yang Liuxiu's head hurt from her racket, so she could only repeatedly appease her and agree first. Then she probed, actually, there are so many noble young masters in the capital, so why must you hang yourself on the second young master? Aunt heard that the Duan estate's young master was brought back. His appearance was outstanding, his cultivation was astonishing. In fact, he was also a good choice. Moreover, he's not as unreachable as your second cousin. Although the Duan residence's young master also has the surname Duan, his father is unknown. He followed his mother into the Duan residence. The old master of the Duan clan was very fond of this grandson of his. His status in the Duan clan was not much lower than any of the legitimate young masters. There have even been rumors that the old patriarch will leave the position of patriarch to his grandson. I don't want to. Yang Fengyan jumped up and refused. What Duan manners, young master? He's just a bastard without a father. I don't want to marry such a person with no status. Her aunt must be lying to her. Who else in this world could be more elegant than her eldest cousin and second cousin? She wouldn't believe it. 5 years ago, she fell in love with second cousin at first sight. In this life, she wouldn't marry anyone other than him. Madame Qin Nei Yang saw that she had already made up her mind, so she could only nod helplessly. In a few days, many people will come to the estate for Master's birthday banquet. You have to properly warn your eldest brother not to be frivolous and stir up trouble. Don't offend the noble ladies who will be coming to the estate. Madame Qin Nei Yang had worried herself to death for her nephew, Ong Jiazhen, and cleaned up quite a few messes. Chapter 521. Yang Fengyan obediently nodded in agreement, but she was very disapproving in her heart. She was naturally aware of her eldest brother's character. 2 years ago, he had used force to kill a lowly servant girl from Blue Mountain Courtyard, and that family actually dared to come knocking for compensation. In the end, it was her aunt who smoothed things over. That family of reckless, lowly, and poor people probably had the grass growing on their graves by now. Yang Fengyan came out of the willow garden of the Qin and Yang family. The more she thought about it, the more unwilling she felt. She simply went to the crane garden. She wanted to see how beautiful the lowly servant girl that the 2 young masters fought over was. Mai Lian's section break. In the Eastern Palace's southern study, a ray of the setting sun fell on the window, illuminating a slender, straight, and aloof figure. Hui Feng soundlessly appeared at the door and bowed in salute. Your Highness, Mei Yi investigated from Shizhou City and seems to have discovered traces of a young lady in the outskirts of Guanlan City. According to the sedan bearer's descriptions, it's most likely a young lady. However, after she reached the capital, she disappeared without a trace. 2 days ago, Mo Lien received an urgent message from Ao Yi, saying that the box of letters in the house in Pear Blossom Alley had disappeared without a trace. He had a feeling that the little fellow had definitely gone back. It had been more than 2 years, and that "I'll wait for you" sentence was still ringing in his ears, but the little fellow just didn't show up. He just didn't know where this little fellow had run off to. Prince Mo tightly pursed his lips, his eyes cold as he looked at the snowy figure outside the window. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have let her leave back then. Just wait, little fellow. As long as you haven't disappeared from this world, we will definitely find you. At that time. Your Highness. Xiao 11Z cautiously walked in and weakly said, Manager Gong brought the great king's verbal edict. During this period of time, all the servants in the Eastern Palace were on tenterhooks and didn't dare to say much. They worked under the Crown Prince's taut expression, afraid that they would be punished if they took a wrong step. Last time, the talkative servant who had been whispering behind His Highness back, saying that His Highness was looking for a girl and was afraid that he wouldn't be able to find her. The next day, not even her shadow could be seen. No one knew where she had been taken to and dealt with. Not to mention the eunuchs and servants in the Eastern Palace who lived in fear and trepidation, even the old officials who came to the South Study to report would occasionally be angered by the Crown Prince until their faces turned pale. His Highness was in a bad mood, and his mood was getting worse by the day. This was something that everyone knew. If they were to provoke His Highness at this time, it would be tantamount to rushing over and looking for trouble. If there was nothing particularly important, none of the officials dared to bother him. Mo Lien didn't pay attention to Xiao 11Z's report. Instead, she turned around and said to Hui Feng, Balon Fortification said that they'll be able to cultivate a batch of seeds that can grow, but the planting period will be prolonged. But that piece of land can at least grow things. I plan to. Your Highness, this old subject is here on the Great King's orders to deliver the Great King's verbal message. Gong Chang's voice traveled in from outside the door. Judging from his voice, it seemed to be wrapped in a trace of trembling. You're afraid, yet you still dare to interrupt me. Mo Lien's upturned phoenix eyes instantly turned ice-cold. Send him in. Mo Lien turned around and walked to the seat of honor, waiting for Gong Chang and to harden his scalp and tremble as he walked into the South Study. Gong Chang and only felt his scalp go numb. He didn't even dare to raise his head as he knelt on the ground with a thud. On the orders of His Majesty, I'm here to deliver the Great King's verbal message to invite His Highness the Crown Prince to attend Old Patriarch Qin's 60th birthday banquet 3 days later. Chapter 522. There was no sound for a long time, and the southern study was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Gong Chang held the invitation in his hand, his forehead drenched in sweat as he inwardly cursed the Great King for swindling people. He hadn't wanted to do such a tedious task, but the Great King had personally ordered him to make this trip. Why was it that when father and son swindled each other, the unlucky ones were always them small shrimps, woo-woo? Xiao 11Z also hung his head and stood to the side, completely treating himself as a block of wood and not uttering a word. Gong Chang's heart thumped for a good while before he finally heard the Crown Prince's cold and low voice ring out in the study. Qin Guelu is celebrating his birthday, and he still wants us to help him. How much face does he think he can have? Let Mo Jiao go, the Crown Prince said coldly. The Crown Prince spoke coldly, and his words contained a wisp of faint ridicule. Hasn't Mo Jiao been thinking about the Vice Minister of the Imperial Wealth Temple, the third miss of the Li Fuhai clan recently? Madame Li was once indebted to the Qin estate for treating her with medicine, so she will definitely bring this unmarried third miss to the Qin estate to congratulate Qin Guelu on his birthday. This will create an opportunity for Mo Jiao so that he can quickly embrace the beauty and take a beautiful concubine home. She can quickly give birth to Consort Cheng's 5th concubine-born grandchild. Gong Chang was flabbergasted and broke out in cold sweat. Crown Prince the Great, you're truly terrifying. Even the trivial matter of Li Fuhai's family, his wife being indebted to the Qin estate. You investigated everything thoroughly. You're so terrifying that you make people feel so pressured. I suddenly sympathize with eldest prince His Highness Jiao. What should I do? Eldest prince's IQ can't even compare to a single hair on your head, so what can he use to fight with you? Mo Lien snorted. That good older brother of ours only has this skill in serving women that can be considered decent. As for the rest, don't even think about brains or strength. Gong Chang This was full of mockery, right? After staring blankly for a moment, Gong Chang, and finally kowtowed to His Highness the Crown Prince. Your Highness, the great king has been taking aura-regulating pills made by the Qin estate's family head recently and feels much better, so he wanted you to make this trip and ask family head Qin for a few bottles of aura-regulating pills while you're at it. Even if it is, Your Highness, please make this trip for the sake of the Qin estate's patriarch. Mo Lien stared coldly at Gong Chang and, since the great king's body is fine, then let him handle this matter personally. Gong Chang'an was speechless. No. Your Highness. This old servant will go back and report to the great king and ask the great king to send His Highness, the eldest prince, to the Qin estate. Gong Chang'an hurriedly crawled out of the door and ran away, not even bothering to drop the invitation card on the ground. If he continued, the crown prince would just abandon his job and quit. Preposterous. A small alchemy aristocratic family's clan head was celebrating his birthday, and they still wanted him to go and congratulate him. His face must be as big as the sky. Mo Lien angrily slammed the desk, causing many books to fall to the floor. Xiao, 11, Z and the other eunuchs and palace maids all knelt down, not daring to lift their heads or even breathe loudly. Your Highness, the great king is muddle-headed and does whatever he wants to do. It's not like this is the first day you found out. Hui Feng bent down to pick up the books that had fallen to the floor and placed them on the desk. Someone must have whispered this into his ears. Mo Lien's handsome face darkened as she sneered, it seems that Young He can't be left alive. Your Highness. A steady and aged voice sounded from outside the door. Mr. Shangguan has arrived. The crown prince stood up to welcome him. When he saw a white-clothed elder with a genial face, he bowed in greeting. The elder stroked his beard and chuckled. Chapter 523. Your Highness, Young He is merely a minor character. Whether she's eliminated or not, everything is within Your Highness's control. Shangguan Jing followed the crown prince into the study's inner room, whispering to him along the way. It wouldn't be nice if some animosity arose between you and the great king because of such an insignificant minor character. Perhaps you don't mind, but in the future, Her Majesty and His Highness you. Ever since Young He entered the palace, her favor hasn't waned for 7 or 8 years. She's a scheming woman. Unfortunately, she can't give birth to a son, so she's no threat at all. The more they spoke, the softer their voices became, and they closed the door after entering the inner room. If Your Highness doesn't want to go to the Qin estate, then so be it. With Your Highness's status, it's up to you whether you want to go to a minor medicinal patrician family. It's truly inappropriate for the great king to trouble you to go just for some pills. As for Young He, just give her a lesson and a warning. Your Highness doesn't need to personally take action on this matter. Hui Feng waved his hand, indicating for the eunuchs and royal maids still kneeling in the study to withdraw. Suddenly, he heard the window frame rustle, and a pitch-black figure quietly floated in. Are you addicted to climbing windows every time? Hui Feng's eyes didn't even move, and he didn't even bother to look at the newcomer. Mei Yi flashed to the table and picked up a kettle to drink. Where's His Highness? He's talking with Sir Shangguan. Hui Feng walked to his side and looked at him suspiciously. What did you find? Miss disappeared after entering the city. Mei Yi set down the teapot and turned around with a stern and grave face. I already reported this matter several days ago. Hui Feng rolled his eyes at him. Only after interacting with this guy for a long time would one know that he was a clown by nature. It was just that he looked more proper on the outside. You investigated for so long, and this is all you've brought back to His Highness. Hui Feng gloated. Just wait. Wait to be unlucky, wait to be punished, wait to be angrily rebuked by His Highness, ha ha ha. Of course it's not this bit of news. Mei Yi humphed, then turned to glance at Hui Feng and said solemnly, it's just that I won't tell you. I want to personally report to His Highness. You. Huifeng harumphed and turned to walk into the inner room, abandoning him. When he reached the door of the small room, he saw the Crown Prince and Shangguan Jing walking out. Sir has just returned to the capital and must be tired from the long journey. Go back and rest first. As she spoke, she looked at Huifeng beside her. You escort Sir back to the estate. Yes. When Huifeng thought about how he couldn't hear the results of Charming Knight's report, he felt as if a cat was scratching at his heart. Your Highness, this old man will take his leave first. Shangguan Jing cupped his hands in salute. Prince Mo hurriedly dodged and returned the greeting, Sir, take care. After Huifeng escorted Shangguan Jing out the door and left with him, Prince Mo finally turned to look at Mei Yi, who was standing on the side, and got straight to the point. How was it? Mei Yi knelt on one knee with a solemn expression. This subordinate is useless. He had investigated at the city gate and found someone to confirm the girl's whereabouts. But after entering the city, the girl seemed to have completely concealed herself and disappeared without a trace. Mo Lien sat down and reached out to massage her faintly swollen head. After a while, she coldly said, continue searching. Even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground and turn the entire capital upside down, you must find her for us. I'll give you 2 more days. If you can't do it, then all of you will return to Marshall Mountain for training. A drop of cold sweat slid down Mei Ye's forehead, and he hastily nodded. Yes. Chapter 524. His Highness the Crown Prince was becoming scarier and scarier, wanting them to return to Marshall Mountain for training at every turn. It was simply inhumane torture. The Crown Prince propped his forehead with one hand and closed his eyes, carefully thinking of where that child could go. He had already sent people to keep an eye on the Qiao estate in Guanlan City, but there was no sign of the little fellow returning these past few days. Guanlan City was the largest city in northern Mo, and even the entire north. In recent years, powerful first-level fortifications had been built on this foundation, and the surrounding land had more than doubled in size. Finding a little girl in such a large city was like finding a needle in a haystack. It was truly an extreme headache. Even if he sent more people, he knew that this would be an extremely arduous task in the short term. Your Highness, this subordinate will take his leave. Mei Yi half knelt there and lowered his head to count mushrooms for a long time, but he didn't hear His Highness telling him to withdraw. Thus, he could only summon up his courage and say this. He was really afraid that if he spoke, His Highness would be unhappy and incur His Highness's wrath. Mo Lien snapped out of her daze and nodded slightly at him. Only then did Mei Yi realize that His Highness the Crown Prince had been in a daze just now, and he didn't exist in his eyes at all. When Mei Yi stepped out of the door, he caught sight of an invitation that had been tossed onto the ground like trash. He muttered to himself, Qin Estate. What is it? Mo Lien looked at Mei Yi, who was standing at the door. Mei Yi coughed lightly. This subordinate just recalled that the Qin Estate was wantonly recruiting servant girls and manservants in the city a few days ago. It seemed to have attracted quite a few people. The Qin Estate has been in the limelight recently, and many women have volunteered to become servant girls for the 2 young masters in the estate. It's just a pity that the Qin Estate has conditions for recruiting servant girls. It seems that they want a batch with some martial arts and great strength. A few days ago, Mo Lien was meticulous and quick-witted. She seemed to have thought of something from Mei Ye's words. That's right, it was a few days ago. Mei Yi abruptly looked at the Crown Prince, a trace of suspicion flashing through his eyes. Could it be that after Miss entered the city, she... That couldn't be. Why would the little girl go to the Qin Estate to be a servant girl without rhyme or reason? Mo Lien's eyes darkened slightly, and a continuous whirlpool surged up in his eyes, swirling deeply. When Consort Zheng received the news, she threw a fit in Sephora Flower Palace. She had already received benefits from the Qin Estate, so if she agreed to it, she would definitely whisper into the old great king's ears until he agreed to let the crown prince go to the Qin estate. But now, the crown prince had said that he wouldn't go, and that meant he wouldn't go. The great king didn't insist and listened to the crown prince's words. He issued a decree to send the son of the great king, Mo Jiao, to the Qin manor to attend the birthday celebration. How was she supposed to show her face in front of the Qin estate? How could the great king's son compare to the crown prince? What would others think of Consort Zheng if she couldn't even accomplish such a small task? Her personal mama couldn't help but remind Gui Fei, the great king values His Highness the Crown Prince very much. It's fine to mention this matter once, but if you mention it again, it will only make the great king feel vexed. Does your highness still remember the incident that happened in the imperial garden a few years ago? After that incident, the great king gave your highness the cold shoulder for more than a month, and the one who benefited was that noble lady he. Consort Zheng felt suffocated whenever she thought of this matter. The great king disliked her for blabbering and slandering the crown prince's birth, so that month, it was like she had been banished to the cold palace. He didn't even poke her Sephora flower palace with his toes. That slut, noble lady he, really benefited. She got pregnant with a bastard child and even gave birth to a son. Chapter 525. As for her, she had painstakingly carried the child for many months only to give birth to a useless daughter. She was truly infuriated. Reporting to your highness, the 15th princess's wet nurse requests an audience. She says that the princess's asthma is acting up again and it seems like she's having trouble breathing. Consort Zheng's expression turned cold as she reached out to interrupt the eunuch's report. She angrily reprimanded, "What's the point of reporting to this consort? This consort isn't a doctor. Are you all dead? Don't you know to go to the Imperial Physician building to call for an Imperial Physician?" After chasing the wet nurse away with a scolding, Consort Zheng's mood became even worse. She angrily slammed the table. "You're all useless things. This daughter was born prematurely and had never been easy to deal with since she was born. Her body was also weak and she had been infected with illnesses since she was young. The great king had barely taken a glance at this daughter. In comparison, the 16th prince, that noble lady he had given birth to, was only half a year younger than little 15th, but he was very much liked by the great king. Consort Zheng felt even more uncomfortable with this comparison. The old maid sighed. She thought that the 15th princess was also quite pitiful. Although she was born noble, she wasn't liked by her parents. She even had asthma at such a young age. What a child with a hard life. Your Highness, should we go see the 15th princess? The old maid carefully asked Consort Zheng for her opinion. Consort Zheng's eyes narrowed and her lips curled as she said coldly, "It's not like this asthma is something that's only been going on for a day or two. Even the imperial physicians are helpless and say that this illness can only be treated normally. This consort has no way to treat it. It's not like she'll stop coughing and gasping if this consort goes to see her." The old maid was speechless. She nodded and retreated to the side without saying anything else. Not long after, news spread to Sephora Flower Palace that the great king had encountered a palace maid who had fainted from hunger on the way to court and rescued her. After washing her clean, he took a look and saw that the palace maid was in her late 20s. Her figure was voluptuous, and her looks were excellent. Her appearance was very sweet, and even her voice was very charming. The king was very pleased on the spot, and he conferred her the title of noble lady. Noble Consort Zheng was stupefied on the spot when she heard this. Palace maid? Where did this palace maid come from to be so audacious? How dare she seduce the king in broad daylight in front of so many people? Consort Zheng might not be able to cover the sky with one hand, but at the very least, she was able to deal with those little bitches who wanted to climb up the social ladder. Who would dare to do such a thing behind her back? She didn't believe that there was no one behind all of this. Now that the great king had a new beauty, he would definitely spend a few days playing with her and would definitely not come looking for her again. When Consort Cheng thought of this, she couldn't help but feel her heart ache. She felt that everything was going wrong. That night, a new piece of news came to Sephora Flower Palace, saying that the queen had specially mentioned it to the great king. She said that noble lady he had contributed greatly to the birth of the 16th prince for the great king. As the 16th prince grew up day by day, shouldn't noble lady his status be promoted? That would not lower 16th status. The great king felt that the queen was virtuous, so what she said was very reasonable. He praised her greatly and promoted noble lady his status to Jiaoyi on the spot. From then on, Jiaoyi he was the number one person below the rank of concubine. It was said that she had angered the old concubines. Consort Cheng was so angry that she didn't even eat dinner. She cursed the queen in her heart for being meddlesome and felt that everyone was opposing her. So what if you gave birth to a brother? Who knows if you can raise him or not? Darling Qiao was completely unaware of the strange and turbulent situation in the royal capital. She felt that the two men from the Qin estate were very annoying. They came looking for her all day with nothing to do, so she didn't even have a chance to be alone. Chapter 526. Tomorrow was old Master Qin's 60th birthday, and these 2 days had been very troublesome. Every day, there would be some distant relatives of the 7 aunts and 8 aunts moving into the Qin estate, and there were also many people from the side branches. Just the arrangement of the courtyards and the various miscellaneous matters made the head steward and second steward so busy that their feet didn't even touch the ground. All the servants and maids in the Qin estate were completely mobilized. Among these people, darling Qiao could be considered the most leisurely one. Because of the Blue Mountain courtyard incident, Kai Wei had been punished, and the news had spread throughout the estate, including among the stewards, that the second young master had taken in a little maidservant who was rather terrifying and not to be trifled with. She even dared to beat up the eldest young master, and even provoked the eldest young master, who went to the second young master to ask for her back. In the end, the two young masters nearly came to blows. Everyone in the estate, including the servants, was discerning. From then on, no one dared to yell at Arbor. So these 2 days, no matter how busy the estate was, no matter how busy the stewards were, they wouldn't dispatch this little grandaunt. Darling Qiao was very leisurely these 2 days. At this time, in order to avoid the annoying Qin Xian, Arbor took a detour to the small garden and found a pavilion to sit for a while. Not long after, she heard 2 lazy maids whispering, "Just now, I saw 2 servants carrying into cousin young master's room. What a sin. I heard that she's a young lady from a good family and is about to get married. She was choosing at a jewelry store. And was caught by cousin young master. Truly a woman with a hard life. You 2 lowly maids, what are you whispering about?" A stern voice instantly rang out. Cousin Mississippi, the 2 maids trembled in fright and hastily knelt down. Slap them. They're all sluts with loose mouths. They actually dare to talk behind their master's back. They thought she hadn't heard, but they were clearly talking about her eldest brother. Although her eldest brother, young Jiazhen, was a disappointment, he wasn't someone 2 lowly maids could casually talk about. Cousin Miss, spare us, spare us. The 2 maids wailed, causing Arbor, who was resting in the pavilion, to furrow her brows repeatedly. This group of people is so long-winded, they should all be poisoned until they become mutes. Just as she was about to get up and attack, she heard First Qin's voice. What are so many people gathered here for? Eldest cousin. That female cousin cried out in surprise. Feng Yan greets eldest cousin. Oh, it's fine. Feng Yan, you can continue. I'm here to look for someone. Qin Xian bypassed his blushing cousin and walked directly to the pavilion behind the rockery. Sure enough, he saw the little girl sitting in the pavilion, her eyes coldly sweeping over him. Xiao Bao, let's go. I'll take you to a fun place. The eldest young master walked over with a smile in his eyes. I'm not free. Arbor flatly refused. The eldest young master, who had been rejected by our dear Xiao Mu 15 to 16 times in the past 2 days, was already used to the little fellow's manner of speaking. He didn't get angry when he heard her words and walked into the pavilion. Today, Hualing Street is holding a medicinal pill appreciation conference. There will also be some high-quality medicinal cauldrons for sale. Let me tell you, it's really fun. If you don't go, you won't be able to see the good stuff. What good stuff can there be? Arbor was startled, but when he heard the 2 words, medicinal cauldrons, his interest was piqued. How can it not be good? Not only can a good medicinal cauldron increase the quality of a medicinal pill, it can also speed up the pill refining process. Think about the mute powder that you scattered 2 days ago. If it was made into a pill, it would be impossible to refine it. If it's refined into a medicinal pill, wouldn't they become mutes for the rest of their lives? There's no need to worry. Will they still cause trouble in the future? Chapter 527. The page boy accompanying the eldest young sir twitched his mouth and reflexively widened his eyes. He felt that the young sir's words didn't sound like anything good. Wasn't this leading the little miss crooked? However, the little stoic felt that eldest Qin's words were surprisingly reasonable. That's right, it was best to get things done once and for all. Otherwise, it would be too troublesome. Every time the effects of the mute medicine wore off after 3 days, she would have to use it again the next time she encountered them nagging. She nodded and was about to speak when she heard an aloof voice abruptly interrupt. No need to trouble eldest brother. I will accompany her to the treasure appreciation conference. Eldest Qin pursed his lips and swept a glance at the Omega Kotoku young sir who was strolling in. He said impatiently, why do you have to fight with me every time we do something? You're like a haunting ghost. It's not that I want to fight with eldest brother over anything. It's that this Mu Xiao Bao was originally one of my court's people, so I hope eldest brother won't meddle too much. Eldest Qin's expression instantly darkened. Don't forget, I was the one who indicated that I wanted to recruit a few maidservants in the beginning. You're the one who interfered. It's only right and proper for me to take my people back now. Who's your people? Arbor and Omega Kotoku shouted in unison. Arbor even more rudely turned around and walked out of the pavilion. On the side, the second young sir completely ignored the cousin Yang Fengyan, who was treated like an invisible person, had flames burning in her eyes. She was so angry that her entire body trembled. She suddenly shouted angrily, have you guys had enough? The 3 people's gazes simultaneously turned to her, and Arbor also stopped. You guys quarrel every day because of this little bitch. Today, I'll punish this bitch for you guys in Aunt's place. Yang Fengyan was about to go crazy from jealousy. After saying this, she lashed her whip at Xiao Mu's small face. That day, she made a detour to Crane Garden to see just how outstanding this bitch's beauty was. In the end, she was stopped outside by the outer courtyard's guards before she even entered, saying that the young sir was busy and didn't have time to entertain her. She was so angry that she almost died. She went back and vented her anger. For the past 2 days, she hadn't found a chance to see the slut that the 2 young masters were thinking about. When she saw her today, it was an average-looking girl with facial paralysis who didn't even have 1/10 of her own looks. She was truly angry, anxious, and vexed. She really didn't understand what was so good about the little slut in front of her that the 2 young masters would fight over her like this. Arbor's eyes were filled with rage. Before Omega Kotoku could step forward to block the whip, he had already jumped in front of Yang Fengyan. With a crack sound, he broke her wrist that was holding the whip and snatched it away. He used his hand to whip Yang Fengyan's face twice. With 2 cracking sounds, Yang Fengyan fell to the ground. She covered her bloody face with her hands and screamed, "Ah, my face." You overestimate yourself. Arbor still wasn't appeased. He kicked her body and sent her flying. Her body flew in a perfect arc in the sky before falling into the small pond next to the rockery with a splash. Young Master Omega Kotoku, who had originally wanted to be the hero who saved the beauty, didn't have the opportunity to be the hero and silently withdrew his hand. Later, when Madame Qin Ne Yang found out that her niece was seriously injured, she was furious. She wanted to summon that audacious maidservant to punish her, but she was told that the girl and the second young master had left the estate and hadn't returned yet. Madame Qin Ne Yang was so angry that she fell backwards. She directly complained to old Master Qin, but she was scolded. He told her to keep her niece and nephew in check and not smear the Qin estate's reputation all day long. Old Master Qin was vexed and conflicted over whether to invite the crown prince, so who had the time to care about this trivial matter? Chapter 528. At this time, the lanterns were lit and the night was waning. There was a sea of people in front of Wuruan Elixir House on Hualing Street. Everyone, the Elixir Appreciation Conference will be held for 5 days in a row in Wuruan Elixir House. Everyone can participate. On the 4th and 5th days, there will be an auction of precious elixirs and cauldrons every day. I hope that everyone here will honor us with your presence. The middle-aged man who spoke had a smile on his face. He should be the deacon of Wuruan Elixir House. No matter who you are or what your background is. As long as you think that you have a good elixir, you can take it out and share it with everyone. Many onlookers clapped and cheered. The onlookers followed their usual habits and went wherever there was excitement. In the next few days, Hualing Street would be completely bustling. Today was only the first day, and there were already so many onlookers. In the future, there would be more and more people every day. At this time, someone walked out of the crowd and came forward with a brown wooden box in his hand. I want to appraise the treasure. 2 people in Wuruan Elixir House led him to a long table. That person arrogantly stepped forward and opened the lid of his wooden box. A faint medicinal fragrance immediately wafted out from within. Good elixir. Good. You can smell the medicinal fragrance as soon as you open it. It must be good stuff. People in the crowd kept cheering. Arbor looked at the source of the scattered voices. Seeing that those people were hiding in the crowd and were scattered far away, they were echoing one another. Their cheers were heard everywhere, causing a few onlookers who didn't know the situation to also cheer along. It's just a level 5 mystic breakthrough elixir, and it's so inferior. It can't even be considered a low-grade elixir. You're only capable of deceiving laymen if you insist on finding a few people to pull the wool over people's eyes. A female voice abruptly rang out from beside Xiao Mu. As soon as she opened her mouth, everyone nearby looked at her. Arbor took a closer look and saw a tall, old-fashioned woman in her early 20s. She looked to be in her early 20s and looked serious. The arrogant face of the man who was displaying the level 5 Xian breakthrough pill suddenly turned into the color of a pig's liver. His eyes stared in the direction of the old-fashioned woman. Who are you? You make it sound so clear and logical. What do you know? What do I know? The old-fashioned woman sneered. Look at the profound breaking pill in your hand. Let's call it the profound breaking pill for the time being. Firstly, its appearance wasn't round enough. It was obvious that it couldn't even reach the standard of an elementary pill. Secondly, low-grade medicinal pills must have orange pill veins. Look at this level 5 mystic breakthrough pill that doesn't have any pill veins and doesn't have a strong pill fragrance. If it's not fooling people, then what is it? Arbor's eyes lit up when he heard that. He couldn't help but ask, Sister, there's a faint purple color on the pill. What grade is it? The woman turned her head and looked at her in surprise. She nodded politely at her and said, if it has purple pill veins, it must be a high-grade pill. It's rare in the entire Guanlan city. Then, for example, What grade is a longevity pill with purple veins made from longevity flowers? Our dear Chiao Mu felt that it was necessary for her to explain. Longevity flowers are considered a mid-grade medicinal ingredient. Pills with purple veins made from them are usually called mid-grade high-grade pills. Young Master Omega Kotoku, who was standing beside Arbor, said lightly. Chapter 529. Upon hearing Omega Kotoku's words, the young lady with the old-fashioned and solemn face immediately nodded approvingly. This young master is right. The man holding the wooden box in front of the long table couldn't help but glare angrily when he saw the three of them chatting happily. He interrupted and scolded, "Nonsense. You think you're invincible just because you said so? If you have the ability, take out a higher-grade mystic breakthrough pill and compete with me." The old-fashioned girl sneered, "Compete with this lousy pill of yours? You're degrading yourself for no reason." At this time, the middle-aged manager of Wuruan Pill House impatiently waved his hand and said, "Enough. You'd better leave." Just as that girl said, this level 5 mystic breakthrough pill doesn't even have the grade of a pill. It can be seen that there are many impurities in it. The probability of an ordinary mystic cultivator advancing after taking it is estimated to be only 1 in 10. Moreover, with such a gradeless and ugly appearance, I'm afraid that there will be a series of side effects after taking it. When the man saw that the mystic breakthrough pill he provided was criticized as worthless, his face couldn't help but flush red. He pushed through the crowd and left amidst the waves of ridicule. Since he's here to appraise a pill, why did he get a few people to mingle in the crowd? Arbor asked in confusion. The old-fashioned and solemn young lady glanced at her and kindly explained, "After the appraisal of this pill, it can be placed in Wuruan Pill House and be auctioned on the 4th or 5th day. It's just that that person thinks everyone is a fool. There are many experts in Wuruan Pill House. It's impossible for him to get away with it. This girl is from the Pill Union, right? Nice to meet you." The middle-aged manager of Wuruan Pill House cupped his hands with a smile at the old-fashioned girl. The girl pursed her lips and nodded at the manager. She didn't say anything else. The following pill appraisal went very smoothly, and no one dared to make a fool of themselves again. Until the end of the day, Arbor hadn't seen a single high-grade pill. One of them took out a middle-grade longevity pill with blue veins. Someone immediately called out a price to buy it. After a round of bidding, the price had reached 5 middle-grade profound stones. In the end, the Wuruan Pill House's deacon dissuaded them. He only said that the pill would be placed in the pill house first, and that the auction would only start on the 4th or 5th day. Everyone rubbed their palms together, and many pairs of eyes stared at the middle-grade longevity pill. Arbor thought that longevity pills were quite popular. Previously, Tong Tong had only made a dozen or so longevity pills and filled a small bottle. Moreover, she didn't lack profound stones, so she didn't bother to sell longevity pills. By the time everyone left, it was already late at night. Arbor followed the second young master back to the Qin estate and saw a large formation at the entrance. There were 2 neat rows of servants holding long sticks in their hands. This was waiting for the rabbit to appear by a tree stump, waiting for him here. Madame Qin and Yang's face was dark, and she was surrounded by a group of servants. She waited until late at night to return from Arbor. Naturally, her expression was not good. She pointed a finger. "Take them." The servants rushed forward like wolves and tigers. "Let's see who dares to act recklessly." Young Master Omega Kotoku coldly shouted, intimidating those vicious servants on the spot. The second young master wasn't someone to be trifled with. In the end, this family was still surnamed Qin. Although the second madam was in charge of the household, the 2 young masters' words still carried weight in front of the master. Madame Qin and Yang's face was overcast, and she looked coldly at Arbor. This lowly girl beat up Miss Biao until her face was disfigured and her hand was broken. Is second young master going to disregard the family rules and protect her? Chapter 530. Only the heavens knew how much her heart ached when she saw Yang Fengyan's face with 2 whip scars. That lowly girl didn't know how to control her strength, and Fengyan's face was scraped so deep that her bones could be seen. It could be seen how ruthless that little bitch was. Although she couldn't get anything good out of the master's side, Madame Qinyang still couldn't hold back her anger. Thus, after thinking it over, she still gathered a group of servants to wait for them at the door. They were determined to capture that bitch and bring her back to be whipped 1,000 times before selling her off. Yang Fengyan was insolent and spoke rudely in front of this young master. I was the one who ordered people to beat her. Does Madame also want to beat and kill me? Omega Kotoku's cold voice fell into Madame Qin and Yang's ears, causing her heart to tremble for no reason. Madame Qin and Yang laughed awkwardly. Second young master really knows how to joke. This madam has already inquired about this matter. It's all because that lowly servant refused to submit to cousin Mrs. discipline. She actually dared to hurt people. Madame Qin and Yang pointed in the direction of Arbor. In the end, she clearly saw the latter roll his eyes at her. This? Was the heavens really going to be turned upside down? I'm sleepy. Couldn't she go back to rest and sleep properly? It was so late at night, and there was no end to it. How troublesome. Arbor kicked the snow under his feet with an impatient expression. Young Master Omega Kotoku also became impatient. All right, if you have any dissatisfaction, you can talk to father. Everyone move aside. The 2 rows of servants didn't dare to block the second young master from entering and all retreated to the back. Madame Qin and Yang was so angry that her chest heaved up and down, and her face turned dark red. Second young master, are you determined to stand in front of me and stand up for this lowly servant? Omega Kotoku coldly glanced at Madame Qin and Yang. I want to save your lives. Tomorrow is father's birthday. If you die here today, who will have the patience to entertain those madams and noble ladies tomorrow? Omega Kotoku's words made Madame Qin and Yang feel a chill down her spine. Her entire body trembled, and she was so angry that her chest puffed up. Her eyes immediately exploded with rage. Oh. Is that so? Since that's the case, I want to see if second young master will really draw his sword against his stepmother for this lowly servant if I insist on killing her today. Madame Qin and Yang pointed in the direction of Arbor. She was so angry that her red eyes bulged. Hold down this lowly servant for me. Beat her to death. The servants were sandwiched between the madam and the second young master and were in a dilemma. Hearing this, they could only brace themselves and go forward to capture Arbor. Xiao Mu's small stoic face instantly turned several degrees colder. Without waiting for a servant's hand to touch her, she ruthlessly kicked that person in the stomach, sending him flying in the direction where the second madam was standing. Madame Qin and Madame Yang didn't expect that the little guy would be so ruthless. She was hit by the servant who flew over. With a bang, both of them smashed into the protruding doors. With a crisp crack, Madame Qin and Madame Yang's waist bones immediately cracked. She immediately let out a miserable howl and fainted. When first Qin rushed over after hearing the news, he saw a group of servants surrounding a stoic-faced little girl with horrified expressions. They were ill at ease and didn't know what to do. What are you all crowding around here for? First Qin irritably roared, do you have nothing better to do in the middle of the night? What are you all blocking the door for? Eldest young master. This maidservant by second young master's side knocked Madam unconscious. First Qin looked at Omega Kotoku and saw that the latter was expressionless. Chapter 531. What kind of expression could Omega Kotoku have? He was about to die from anger. He had already said that he had stopped Madame Qin Yang for her sake. She wouldn't listen. Now that her waist was broken, how could she get up to host the birthday banquet tomorrow? Now that Madame had collapsed, he could only have his father's concubine, concubine May, come out tomorrow to entertain those madams and misses. However, concubine May's status wasn't presentable, so he was afraid that she would slighted those madams. The more Omega Kotoku thought about it, the more vexed he became. He glared fiercely at the woman lying unconscious on the ground. She didn't know her own worth, stupid. Xiao Bao, why did you beat madam to the ground again? Qin Yi glanced at the little girl's expressionless face. He really wasn't gloating over her misfortune, but it was really funny. The little fellow had just beaten his cousin's sister to the bed in the afternoon, and at night, he had fractured her aunt's bones. How was this girl cut out to be a maid? She had the temper of a young miss all day long. Once her temper flared up, it was unstoppable. Annoying, time to sleep. Arbor glared at the servants surrounding him. Everyone scattered like birds and beasts, making a path for him. Tomorrow, tell concubine May to come out and entertain the noble ladies. Don't always dress so shabbily. Omega Kotoku threw this sentence at his older brother, then stepped through the door. The servants looked at each other in dismay, their hearts thumping in fear. They all secretly said that it was fortunate that they hadn't really done anything to this little girl. Otherwise, the one lying there would be themselves. Looking at the two young masters' attitudes, they didn't seem to have any intention of reprimanding the young lady. Instead, Madam was so miserable. So close, so close. Early the next morning, Arbor saw the head steward smiling apologetically as soon as he stepped out of the door. After greeting him, Arbor's mouth couldn't help but twitch. Why did the head steward come so early in the morning? He came to greet her in advance, saying that there would be many people coming to the estate today, and there might be some ignorant fool among the guests who might offend the young lady for no reason. He hoped that the little grandaunt would give face to the Qin estate and let them off. She wouldn't break their hands or waste bones at the slightest provocation. How baffling. This baby is so hot and gentle. He had never been a cruel person. Arbor strolled away expressionlessly. She was going to guard the kitchen today to see if anyone dared to do anything to the food. She had considered it. Since the person behind family head Qin was so confident, they only needed to call the crown prince over to deal with him. There were only two ways. The first was assassination, and the second was poison. It was impossible to assassinate from the start. Wouldn't it have to be done after 3 rounds of drinking? Therefore, she had to keep a close eye on the kitchen today. As the young lady walked past, everyone was on tenterhooks. When they saw her coming from afar, they immediately avoided her, as if she was some evil person. They were truly a group of people who were baffled to the extreme. I've always been easy to talk to. What made you think that I'm a violent and scary person who would beat people up for no reason? Preposterous. Darling Xiao angrily turned a corner and saw a plump figure carrying 7 to 8 potted plants of various sizes quickly walking towards her. Xiang Yuan. She remembered this young lady's name. Among the maids who came in with her, this Xiang Yuan was the most cowardly and easily bullied. Because of her large build, she was always ostracized by the other maids. However, Darling Xiao quite liked this young lady who had a carefree personality. Chapter 532. When these maids saw her, they gave her a "I can't talk to you at all" expression, as if she really wanted to chat with them. Only Xiang Yuan didn't despise her and was willing to talk to her, even giving her pointers. Ah, little treasure, little treasure. Xiang Yuan was also happy to see Arbor. But she was holding so many flower pots with both hands, even moving her chin here and there. Her entire body was stiff and couldn't make any big movements. Arbor got angry when he saw her cowardly appearance. Why didn't you take a small cart to transport them? She must have been bullied again. Look at her, what's the use of being so big? If it were her, who would dare to trick her like this? She would punch them one by one, and even if she couldn't beat them, she would scare them. That bunch of cowards, if you intimidated them too much, they wouldn't dare to make any more small moves. It's fine, it's fine. Xiang Yuanyuan smiled foolishly. Little treasure, I'm a little busy. I still have to send these to the front yard. You go play first. Let me help you. This fellow simply couldn't bear to look at her. Arbor saw her drop a pot of flowers and stretched out his leg to catch it firmly, then flipped it over to his hand. Ah, no need, no need. Xiang Yuanyuan hurriedly shook her head and looked at Arbor with a bunch of pots in her arms. Come, come, put it in my hands, I'll carry it over together. Come on. Put it on your head. Arbor looked at her in annoyance. With so many pots in her arms, where would she put them? All right, I'll go with you. Give me 2 more pots. Arbor was expressionless. No need, no need. Xiang Yuanyuan shook her head again. I can carry them. They're heavy. You have thin arms and legs, don't fall on them. Arbor's mouth twitched. I'm actually not that weak. The snow stopped, but there was a thick layer of snow on the ground that hadn't melted. Along the way, Arbor deliberately stepped on a long row of crooked footprints, forming 2 rows with Xiang Yuanyuan's big footprints. Xiang Yuanyuan was chattering on the side, talking and laughing with her. The cold wind was blowing on her face, but it was not very cold. Turning into a long corridor made of red cedar wood, the 2 of them creaked on the floor as they walked forward. From afar, they saw a group of distinguished guests coming towards them. Please, please, the banquet hasn't started yet. Everyone, please follow this old servant to the landscape hall for a short rest. The second steward, who had his head lowered and waist bent, led a dozen or so people along the way. They were all young masters. The young ladies and madams had all been taken by concubine Mei to the snow pavilion to admire the plum blossoms. The second steward had long seen Mu Xiaobao, this little grand aunt, and secretly cupped his hands in greeting, with a fawning expression. Xiao Mu wasn't someone who liked to stir up trouble, so she and Xiang Yuanyuan both moved to the side of the corridor to make way. The corridor itself was not spacious, but it was more than enough for 2 people to pass through. It was just that the area Xiang Yuanyuan occupied was a little big. When one of the young masters with oily hair and powdered face passed through, his elbow accidentally touched Xiang Yuanyuan's stomach. Xiang Yuanyuan immediately sucked in a breath, sucked in her stomach, and shrank back. That noble young master, however, retracted his hand in disdain. His thick eyebrows furrowed, and he angrily glared at Xiang Yuanyuan's face. Lowly servant. Don't you have eyes? A piece of fat pork dares to tease this young master. Something happened. The second steward's tears flowed out in an instant. Sure enough, in the next second, he saw the little grandaunt standing in front of Xiang Yuanyuan and fiercely kicking that powdered young master's stomach, sending him flying heavily. With a crash, he drooped halfway down the corridor's railing. This grandaunt still hasn't vented her anger. She directly smashed the big flower pot in her hands onto the back of that unlucky young master's head with a crash. Chapter 533. All the young masters were stupefied, wondering if there was something wrong with their eyes. How did this audacious maidservant dare to violently beat up the Marquis of Su An's family's young master? It's quite lively. A cold yet very familiar voice suddenly drifted into Arbor's ears. Arbor immediately retracted the hand that smashed Sir Flower and ran back to the dazed Xiang Yuanyuan. She nudged her. Let's go. But where could they go? The corridor behind them was blocked by those dozen or so youths, so Arbor could only brace herself and tug Xiang Yuanyuan to turn around. A pair of men were walking toward them. The one on the right was about 25 or 26 years old and had an ordinary appearance. The one on the left had a handsome face and peach blossom eyes. He was about 20 years old and wore a jade robe. His figure was slender and straight, and his long hair was loosely tied behind his waist. Arbor felt guilty and didn't dare to raise her head, but she kept feeling that scorching gaze landing on her. Don't be afraid, she comforted herself, this darling has already disguised herself into this ghastly appearance. Even if father and mother came, they wouldn't recognize me. Probably no one else in this world can recognize me besides myself. But why did she feel that Duanyu, that guy's gaze was so scorching that it was a bit terrifying? It's fine, calm down, she must calm down. She couldn't relax her expression at all. It would be strange if he could recognize her face after it had changed so much. Our dear Xiao Mu expressionlessly raised her head and fearlessly met Duanyu's gaze. Her heart skipped a beat, and she was about to run away in a fit of anger. Duanyu really was staring at her without blinking. He stared at her with a terrifying gaze that could devour her. There wasn't the slightest hint of warmth in those beautiful peach blossom eyes. Instead, a raging fury was churning in the depths of his eyes. How was that possible? Darling Xiao was dumbfounded. She had already disguised herself to this extent, so how could he recognize her with a single glance? No, she must be scaring herself. He was tricking her, right? Darling Xiao continued to console herself. She poked Xiang Yuan and didn't say anything, urging her to leave quickly. Just as she brushed past Duanyu, she felt a grip tighten around her wrist. He had actually abruptly grabbed her wrist. You're very good. Duanyu felt that the instant he saw this little stoic, he couldn't control his belly full of fire. He had been looking for her all over the world like a fool. He couldn't eat or sleep well, and he was deeply worried for more than 2 years. However, he didn't expect this girl to be in Jingdo, right under his nose. Arbor was scared to death. She belatedly realized that Duanyu really did see through her identity. One glance. How could this be? Her disguise was so perfect. The second manager ran over in tears and stopped Duanyu, apologizing profusely, sorry, young Master Duan. Sorry to disturb you. This old servant will take you there now. Arbor saw that the second steward was blocking him and took the opportunity to run away. He heard the second steward roaring angrily behind him, stop right there. Run. Let's see where you can run to. Arbor ran out of the long red cedar corridor and saw Situe walking over after turning a corner. Situe was taken aback. He opened his mouth and greeted her, little junior sister. Arbor was completely stupefied. She ran all the way to the garden and kept looking at herself in the pond. What was going on? Even Situe could recognize her at a glance. What exactly went wrong with her perfect disguise? On the other end, Situe was dumbstruck. Just now, he actually saw little junior sister who had disappeared for more than 2 years. Were his eyes playing tricks on him? Hurry, 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 hurry and report to the Lord that the Crown Prince's carriage is about to reach the main entrance. An excited servant shouted all the way. The Qin family patriarch, who was frowning and didn't know how to report to his superiors, abruptly jumped up from his stool when he heard this, and his eyes flickered. Hurry, call the 2 young sirs and follow me to the main entrance to welcome him. Didn't they say that they weren't coming? They had already received definite news from Consort Zheng that the Crown Prince wouldn't be coming, and they had already welcomed His Highness the eldest prince, Mo Jiao. Who would have thought that His Highness the Crown Prince was truly an unpredictable person? Chapter 534. Arbor was standing at the edge of the pond, looking at the clear water and endlessly taking pictures. Her small face was full of confusion. She heard some messy footsteps. Turning her head, she saw several servant girls rushing over from the stone path. Hurry, hurry. Family head has ordered for everyone to gather at the main entrance. His Highness the Crown Prince's carriage is already at the entrance. Ah, the servant girls' voices rose and fell in unison. They had long heard that their His Highness the Crown Prince was a peerlessly handsome man who didn't lose to eldest young master or second young master. They were so excited. His Highness the Crown Prince rarely showed his face. Was he going to come to the Qin estate today? Ah! Hurry and help me take a look. See if my makeup is smudged. Heavens, if I had known earlier, I would have worn that begonia hairpin today. The little fellow threw the women's chattering to the back of her mind. Arbor didn't have time to think carefully and abruptly ran towards the kitchen. That fool, why did he really come? Someone else wants to deal with you, idiot. You're a high and mighty crown prince. Why are you blindly joining in the fun? Don't you know that there is no good banquet, no good meeting? The little fellow ran to the kitchen's back door in one breath. With a light leap, she was already on the kitchen's roof beam. Squatting there, she propped up her chin and carefully observed for a while. The kitchen was in full swing at this moment. All kinds of ingredients were being pushed in on small carts like flowing water. They were being washed, cut, boiled, and stir-fried. It was very lively. The head steward who controlled the entire kitchen was currently yelling back and forth, "Hurry, hurry. Why are your hands and feet so slow? I told you to hurry up and wash. It's about to be cooked. The guests are all in their places. The banquet is about to start. Everyone, hurry up. Ah! Hurry, hurry, hurry." Arbor squatted on the beam and impatiently pursed her lips. On second thought, if this banquet was messed up and the atmosphere was foul, wouldn't a certain person run back to the palace in a fit of anger? Our dear Xiao Mu blinked, and her gaze fell on the dishes that were lined up and ready to be served. A talisman suddenly floated out of his fingertips. The little guy silently opened the talisman, and his figure suddenly disappeared from the beam. Not long after, a bowl with a lid slowly floated up into the air. It floated in the air, and some of the seasonings nearby also flew over. Soon, a bunch of oil, salt, soy sauce, and vinegar were sprinkled in. Middle grade invisibility talisman. Invisibility lasts for 15 minutes. It is ineffective in front of people with a higher cultivation base. After she had opened the fourth jade slip, she had learned a few new middle-level talismans. The Vajra talisman was one of them, and the invisibility talisman was the second. After adding a lot of ingredients to each plate, Arbor felt satisfied. After squatting for a while, Arbor found nothing unusual. He couldn't help but feel somewhat puzzled. Could it be that family head Qin didn't plan to poison the food and instead planned to assassinate him? However, the poison was indeed a little low-end. The crown prince had a specialized apothecary by his side, and everything he ate would be tested first. As Xiao Mu thought this, she floated out of the kitchen and headed towards the Qin estate's central courtyard. She wondered what their expressions would be when they ate the spiced dishes later. If Duan Yu, that germaphobe, ate a mouthful of mud, his expression would definitely be exceptionally spectacular. At this time, the Qin estate's patriarch was bowing to welcome Prince Mo at the wide-open main entrance with his family members. The guests who had heard the news also came forward to greet him. Mo Yen alighted from the carriage and coldly stared at family head Qin, who was at the front of the procession. Chapter 535. Cold sweat trickled down Qin Guilu's forehead. When the crown prince didn't speak, even he was intimidated. He felt as if his heart was tightly clenched by an invisible hand. Family head Qin is the birthday boy today, so there's no need to be overly courteous. After a while, Mo Yen finally spoke in a low voice and waved his hand to dismiss everyone's formality. Qin Guilu felt as if he had been pardoned, and he hastily stood up with a smile on his face. "We are honored by the crown prince's presence. Your presence brings light to our humble dwelling. Please forgive us for any neglect. Family head Qin, there's no need for pleasantries. We came today to..." The crown prince has come." A dry voice suddenly interrupted Mo Yen's words. A man in his 30s wearing a bright yellow deerskin cloak was escorted in like a moon surrounded by stars. Mo Lien coldly swept a glance at him. Eldest royal brother. Heh, eldest brother isn't deliberately stealing your limelight. It was royal father who specially instructed me to come here to celebrate the Qin estate's elderly head's birthday. I didn't expect sixth brother to be in such a good mood. That's right, that's right. Many people from various patrician families have come today, so sixth brother should also come out and walk around more. Before the great king's son could finish blabbering, the crown prince had already strode inside. The moment he moved, family head Qin led the two young masters and the entourage to follow in a hubbub. The great king's son, Mo Jiao, was immediately embarrassed, and he clenched his fists tightly in his sleeves. This was the crown prince's attitude toward this group of princes, willful, arrogant, and disregarding them. If he was willing to look at you, he would look. If he wasn't, he wouldn't say a single word. Your Highness, please come this way. Qin Guelu personally led the way and bowed as he led the crown prince to the banquet hall. Halfway there, they heard coquettish voices coming from the garden. Evidently, a group of madams and ladies were admiring the plum blossoms in the rear garden. When the great king's son, Mo Jiao, thought of the purpose of this trip, his eyes swiveled, and he hastily walked up to urge the crown prince. Sixth brother, it's still early to leave the banquet anyway. Why don't we take a walk in the garden first? I've always heard that the Qin estate's plum blossoms bloom the best, so this is the best time to admire the plum blossoms. Qin Guelu immediately laughed and repeatedly expressed his assent. Your Highness, please, please. There's a rare thousand snow plum in the manor that has already bloomed. It's worth taking a look. Prince Mo wasn't in the mood to appreciate the plum blossoms. Just as he was about to impatiently refuse, he looked up and saw Duan Yu and Situ Yi walking over together. There was also a young man with ordinary features following closely behind the two of them. He kept wanting to speak, but Duan Yu and Situ Yi were chatting among themselves, so he couldn't get a word in edgewise. Little young Master Duan, young Master Situ. Qin Guelu chuckled as he cupped his hands in greeting. Duan Yu nodded, and his indifferent gaze swept over everyone. He suddenly launched an attack at Omega Kotoku. Second young master, a mischievous maidservant by your side used a flower pot to injure the Marquis of Su An's family's fifth young master. Shouldn't we find her and demand an explanation for the Marquis of Su An's fifth young master? Omega Kotoku, eldest Qin was instantly speechless. How many people had this lass smashed in the past 2 days? She truly had guts that didn't fear anything in the world. Qin Guelu was appalled when he heard this. What? How is the Marquis of Su An's fifth young master's current situation? What maidservant is actually so audacious? Go and find her. The group of Qin estate servants couldn't help rolling their eyes. Lord, your acting is really not bad. Chapter 536. Didn't you already know who it was? Other than that person who beat Miss Biao and Madame until they were bedridden, who else could be so daring? Omega Kotoku curtsied indifferently to Duan Yu. Young Master Duan, I'm very sorry. She is still young and doesn't know any better. Her actions are based on her preferences, so please forgive her. Everyone's eyes widened in astonishment. The other party had already come to demand an explanation, so was it all right for young Master Omega Kotoku to be so protective? What kind of maidservant was raised to be so audacious? Were you sure she was a maidservant and not eldest miss? Duan Yu's eyes shot out flames of fury. Look, what kind of lousy matter was this? Omega Kotoku's attitude of taking responsibility for darling Xiao no matter what happened made people loathe her for no reason. Mo Lien glanced at Duan Yu with a frown. Why was there something wrong with this guy today? Insulting someone's maidservant for no reason? Come to think of it, he wasn't such a senseless person. At this time, a commotion broke out in the garden. A maidservant came to report that Miss Qianqian of the Talisman patrician family and Su Mingzhu, the third miss of the Marquis of Placation's estate, got into a fight in the rear garden, and the servants from both sides couldn't restrain the two misses. Everyone looked at each other, bewildered. Qin Guelu only felt his head throbbing. The birthday banquet hadn't even started yet, so what kind of trouble was this? He recognized this maidservant as Concubine May's personal maidservant. The matter must have developed to the point where even Concubine May couldn't handle it, so she hurriedly came to report. When the great king's son heard this, he was energized and hastily said, "Then quickly, let's quickly go take a look. It wouldn't be good if she injured someone." Mo Lien swept him a mocking glance. "You're only thinking about the miss of the Grand Lucier family. What a good-for-nothing." The group moved to the pavilion in the garden, and along the way, they heard Concubine May's maidservant talk about the ins and outs of the matter. Everything was originally quite good. The madams and misses were all admiring the flowers and snow near the pavilion, and everything was harmonious. That maidservant shuddered at the master's glare and said, "It was Miss Mu of the Talisman patrician family said she was bored and suggested a beast duel." Beast fighting was a boring game that the nobles played in their spare time. Of course, they wouldn't use their own mystical beasts to fight. Normally, they would use some young mystical beasts to fight. Basically, after a single battle, the two young mystical beasts would be riddled with scars and close to death. Arbor floated out of the kitchen. When he passed by the garden, he was attracted by the cries of the baby beasts. When she arrived, the two little beasts were already tearing each other to death. However, it was clear that Miss Mu's beast was slightly better. She won. As a result, Su Mingzhu, the third miss of the Marquis of Stability's estate, flew into a rage out of humiliation. She was so angry that she used her sword to wildly hack at the little beast that had lost the competition. Arbor was furious when he saw this. He ran over and gave Su Mingzhu a big slap to make her stop. And then things went wrong. Xiao Mu was still invisible at this time. Third young Miss Su thought that this slap was from Miss Mu, so she immediately turned around and mercilessly slapped Miss Mu back. The stupefied Miss Mu didn't expect third young Miss Su to be such a sore loser. At once, she couldn't hold back the anger in her heart and pounced over to slap Su Mingzhu as well. The two immediately started fighting. Neither of them were kind people, scaring Concubine May to the point that she collapsed to the ground. She shouted delicately, "Io, stop fighting, stop fighting. Quickly go invite master. Quickly go." It would have been better if she didn't shout, but once she did, Arbor felt goosebumps all over his body. He immediately thought that this voice was the same as that night when she snuck into the Qin estate and heard through the window. Chapter 537. Concubine May was paralyzed on the ground in fright. All the official madams looked down on her, and none of them were willing to help her. Originally, the madams were already very displeased that the Qin estate sent a concubine to entertain them when they were visiting the estate for the Qin estate's birthday banquet. Now that they saw Concubine May acting like a coquettish concubine who couldn't be shown in public, they felt like they had eaten a fly and looked down on her even more. Madame Mu sat there motionlessly with a smile and didn't stop her daughter. In any case, her daughter wouldn't suffer a loss. That Su Mingzhu simply wasn't her Qianqian's match. Her eyes contained a layer of frost as she coldly gazed at the third miss of the Marquis of Placation's estate. A mere miss of a declining Marquis's estate dared to attack her daughter. She deserved to be taught a lesson. When the servants shouted, "His Highness the Crown Prince has arrived," our dear Xiao Mu, who was watching with relish, jumped in fright. She immediately turned around and fled in a panic. She felt like there was a row of piercing gazes on her back that burned her. "Fuck, I've already turned invisible, so why can't I escape your discerning eyes?" Our dear Xiao Mu ran very quickly, but how could she compare to the Crown Prince's terrifying speed? Just as he leaped over, his hand was already about to grab her wrist. Our dear Xiao Mu hurriedly threw several speed talismans on herself and fled like a wisp of smoke. The crown prince didn't chase after her and stopped, his gaze lingering as he gazed in the direction she ran off in. Ha! You know how to feel guilty now. You even dared to avoid me. You really are a naive darling. You think you can run away after showing yourself? Your Highness. When Mu Qianqian saw the crown prince dashing in her direction, her maiden heart nearly leaped out of her chest. I am fine. Your Highness doesn't need to worry. Mu Qianqian blushed as she gave a coquettish laugh. She thought that the crown prince was dashing over because he saw that she was being bullied. She thought that His Highness the crown prince was worried about her. In reality, there was no one else in Mo Lian's eyes except for that fleeing darling who had turned invisible. It was only when he heard Mu Qianqian speak that he realized she was standing next to him and looking at him bashfully. He was instantly annoyed. Recently, his mother had been busy identifying noble ladies for him, and apparently, she quite liked this talisman patrician family's eldest miss. Mo Lian had something on her mind, so she walked to Duan Yu's side. She gave him a look, and the two of them walked to the side. Qin Guelu only felt vexed, and he reprimanded concubine Mei before placating the two patrician family's young misses. He only felt that so many things had happened before the banquet had even started, and he was flustered. Like a proud peacock, Mu Qianqian glanced at the disheveled Su Mingzhu before returning to her mother's side. Her large eyes stared expectantly at the crown prince's back. Madame Mu patted the back of Mu Qianqian's hand, hinting for her not to be impatient. The position of His Highness's official wife, the Mu family is determined to get it. On the other end, Xiao Mu ran all the way back to the pool and looked at her reflection in the water. Yes, the invisibility talisman was useless in front of people with higher cultivation than him. No wonder a row of piercing gazes fell on her. There was nowhere to hide. Fortunately, she had escaped quickly. Otherwise, wouldn't she have been caught? Why was she feeling guilty? Why did she have to run away? At worst, she would just be caught. Once she thought of being caught, a certain person started feeling guilty again. Xiao Mu looked at her reflection in the pool for a while. No matter how she looked at it, her face was completely different from before. There wasn't the slightest flaw on her body, so how in the world did someone recognize her? She touched her flawless, small face. Chapter 538. After the banquet started, the atmosphere was still peculiar. The crown prince was silent, so no one dared to casually speak loudly. Qin Guelu coughed in mock embarrassment and respectfully reminded, Your Highness. The crown prince looked up and nodded at the 2 rows of guests below. Today is family head Qin's birthday, so there's no need to be reserved. Let's eat. It was only then that everyone picked up their chopsticks with relaxed expressions and casually tasted the food. Afterwards. Poo. Pft. Cough. All sorts of strange spitting sounds came from the mouths of these aristocratic family disciples. Everyone speechlessly looked at the dumbfounded Qin Guelu and saw that his face had turned green after tasting a mouthful of food. They didn't know whether to spit or not. This mouthful was so splendid. It felt like a seasoning bottle had been knocked over, and there were all sorts of exotic flavors. Oh, and he even ate a mouthful of dirt. Pfft, Duan Yu facepalmed, his shoulders shaking from laughter. Good heavens, everyone ate a mouthful of dirt. This truly was so joyful. Thankfully, he had picked up his chopsticks late. Look at the crown prince's eccentric expression, ha. Serves you right. You're out of luck. It's all your fault for spoiling you, so you deserve to eat dirt. Thinking back to the invisible figure he saw in the garden just now, it was easy to figure out who had done this good deed. Qin Guelu immediately turned pale with fright and knelt before the crown prince. He didn't even dare to raise his head or look at the crown prince's eccentric expression. "Your Highness, please forgive me." It was this one's incompetence in controlling the servants that caused the situation in the main kitchen. "Rest assured, Your Highness, this one will definitely find the mastermind as soon as possible and punish them severely." Mo Lien gracefully accepted the plate handed over by the junior eunuch beside her and silently spat out the foreign substance in her mouth. She waved her hand at Qin Guelu and said, "Rise, it has nothing to do with you." Qin Guelu immediately felt as if he had been pardoned, and he stood up while wiping the sweat from his forehead, thanking her profusely. "Where's old fifth of the Marquis of Su An's estate?" the Crown Prince suddenly asked. His gaze met Duan Yu's for a moment before looking away. The Marquis of Su An's estate's fifth young master, whose head was wrapped in bandages and who looked extremely miserable, was immediately dragged over. The fifth young master's face was full of confusion. He did not understand what was going on. He was about to return home, but he was forcibly invited down from the carriage. This meant that the Crown Prince wanted to see him. Although he said it was an invitation, his attitude was very rude and unyielding. This was the Crown Prince's style of dealing with people. Young Master Omega Kotoku's brows slightly creased. Just now, it was he who had quickly arranged for people to take care of this Marquis of Su An's residence's fifth young master, ordering people to send him back to his residence. But now, he had actually returned. Omega Kotoku sensed that something was amiss. Since the beginning, the young master of the Duan family had been targeting Xiaobao, and now even the Crown Prince, second young master raised his head and looked at the Crown Prince coldly. The latter looked back coldly. "Marquis of Su An's estate's old fifth, how is your body? I heard that you were hit on the head by an audacious maidservant." The Crown Prince didn't even know what this fellow's name was and could only call him Marquis of Su An's estate's old fifth. Huifeng stood on the side, and his mouth silently twitched. The Marquis of Su An's estate's old fifth, the powder-faced young man Hu Yukong, was immediately overwhelmed by the favor and bowed. "Thank you for your Highness the Crown Prince's concern. This humble subject's body is fine, and I was just about to return to my residence to rest." Marquis of Su An's estate's old fifth. The Crown Prince stared deeply at the unlucky fellow wrapped in bandages below. "Don't worry. With us here, us will definitely uphold justice for you. How about I find that maidservant for you to confront her face to face?" Chapter 539. The pink-faced youth was overwhelmed by the favor and knelt down repeatedly, nodding in thanks. "Yes, yes. Many thanks for your Highness's favor." The Crown Prince nodded in satisfaction and turned to look at Qin Guelu. "Family head Qin, go call that maidservant over. Look at how badly she beat up the Marquis of Su An's son. How can this matter be resolved peacefully?" Qin Guelu's forehead was drenched in cold sweat as he furtively glanced in the direction of his two sons. Omega Kotoku beckoned to a servant and instructed in a low voice, "Go invite the miss over and tell her not to be afraid. I will deal with everything." Qin Guelu sighed in relief. He was worried that this child Omega Kotoku's temper would flare up and contradict the Crown Prince to his face, causing the matter to spiral out of control. Seeing that Qin Guelu sent someone to invite her over, his expression relaxed slightly, and he cupped his hands. "I've already arranged for the main kitchen to prepare a new meal. Everyone, please wait for a moment. Enjoy a song and dance first." The appearance of Junhu Pavilion's Miss Ran immediately drew cheers from the various patrician families' marquises and grandsons. Very soon, the earth-eating episode was over. Everyone was watching Miss Ran's rare moon dance in high spirits. The Crown Prince wasn't in a hurry either. He swirled the wine cup in his hand and swept his gaze over the guests below from time to time, a frightening smile curling his lips. "Jojo, are you ready?" Arbor shook her head like a rattledrum. "Not going." The Qin estate servant in charge of inviting people twitched his mouth as he repeatedly cupped his hands and bowed. Little great-aunt. Please come with me. Young master and the others are all waiting for you. Don't worry, young master said that he will take care of everything. He will definitely guarantee that you will be fine. Arbor hugged a tree and dodged to the side. Not going, not going. The servant coughed and had a bright idea. You were in high spirits when you beat up the Marquis of Su-En's fifth master. Are you scared now? I'm scared. Arbor's eyes flared with anger. She then lowered her small head dejectedly. Fine, fine, she was scared that she felt guilty when she saw the crown prince. 2 years ago, she promised him that she would go to the capital to find him, but in the end. Let's go, little grand-aunt. There really isn't enough time. The servant begged bitterly, coaxing and inviting Xiao Mu to the banquet's antechamber, forcing a duck onto a perch. The male and female guests were separated at the birthday banquet. However, on the way to Arbor, they had to pass by the female guests' seats and head toward the front hall. Along the way, they received puzzled looks from the ladies. What should come will come. Darling Qiao's emotions calmed down. What was she afraid of? Wasn't he just going back on his word and getting fat? Wasn't it just 2 years of hiding and not wanting to see anyone? Humph. What could he do to her? But what should I do if I'm so scared? Her small hands were inexplicably covered in cold sweat. Sob, sob, sob. Is it really okay to be so cowardly? When the servant went in to report, Lady Rant's dance had just finished, and the entire hall was silent. The crown prince smirked and said coldly, "Bring her in." Everyone turned their heads to look and saw a little girl with a stiff expression walking in from the front hall. From the moment the child entered, the crown prince's gaze was firmly locked on her. He stared at her intently, as if he was crazy. The fire in his heart couldn't be suppressed and shot straight up. The little girl's hands were tucked in her small sleeves as she stepped on the limestone floor tiles and walked forward. Her expressionless face looked straight ahead, as if she didn't care about anyone at all. It made people laugh involuntarily. Little junior sister, it's really you. Situ-E was the first to jump up and stared at her in disbelief. He still thought that he was dreaming. Who are you? Arbor turned around expressionlessly. When this low voice came out of her mouth, Situ-E was really stunned. Because Xiao Mu's voice had also been processed with medicine, the moment she spoke, her voice was a bit lower than her usual crisp and soft voice, and it was very deep and insidious. Seeing him stunned, Arbor couldn't help but feel secretly happy. See, I knew it was a bluff. She didn't recognize me at all. Humph, her flawless disguise technique, how could there be a mistake? There's a lot of content here, so don't be anxious. Chapter 540. Situ-E was dumbstruck as he stood there without moving. He couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he racked his brains. Why was this voice different from his little stoic junior sister's? But looking at this face, there was no doubt that this was his expressionless junior sister, right? There wouldn't be a second Sundra little stoic like her in this world. The crown prince's gaze didn't move from the little fellow's body, and the corners of his mouth curled faintly. Darling, you want to ascend to the heavens, right? You disguised your appearance and even changed your voice. Ha, so impressive. Did you think no one would recognize you by doing this? That movement, that expression, that frosty gaze, that yearning that was imprinted in the depths of his bone marrow and soaked into his blood. Even if you wrapped yourself in a black robe and shrunk your head and tail, we can still recognize you with a glance. We absolutely won't forget. Our dear Xiao Mu sneaked a peek at the crown prince's expression and discovered that guy was propping up his chin with one hand. Light flickered in his slightly upturned phoenix eyes as he stared unblinkingly at her. The little stoic reflexively extended 2 fingers and stealthily gestured in the direction of his line of sight. She discovered that his line of sight was in a straight line, and he was staring at her. The little fellow guiltily tugged at the strands of hair that floated in front of her eyes. She couldn't figure it out. My disguise and voice are such perfect moves. What exactly is the situation? I really want to ask them, where in the world did you recognize me? Next time, she definitely had to pay attention to this aspect. This way, her disguise would be flawless. Cough. Qin Guelu couldn't help but chuckle dryly when he saw that no one was speaking at all. He berated Xiao Mu, come over here. What's your name? Why did you hit the Marquis of Su An's estate's fifth young master? Eldest Qin covered his face with his hand. He simply couldn't bear to continue watching his pretentious father. What didn't family head Qin know about every single thing that happened in the estate? He was asking the obvious. Why? Speak. Family head Qin glared angrily at a certain someone who didn't utter a word and even slapped the short table heavily. The Marquis of Su An's estate's fifth young master, Hu Yukong, whose head was wrapped in bandages and who had an extremely miserable expression, also got up from the ground and glared at Arbor with bloodshot eyes, demanding an explanation. Arbor was baffled. He thought to himself, what's going on? Didn't they call her over because the crown prince wanted to confront her face to face and expose her identity? How would she know about the fifth young master of the Marquis' estate? Ever since she bumped into Duan Yu and was recognized by him at a glance, the little stoic had been conflicted between, oh no, I was recognized, and, what's going on? How did they recognize me? In the midst of all these questions, he had long forgotten about the episode where he smashed the fifth young master in the Red Cedar Promenade. Now that he mentioned something about the Marquis of Su An's estate's fifth young master, to tell the truth, she really didn't remember. Moreover, she did make a move, but she did not see the fifth young master's face clearly at all. Therefore, even though fifth young master was glaring at her like a tiger eyeing its prey, she still put on an innocent face with a blank expression. Mo Yen looked at her small face and knew that she had long forgotten about beating up the Marquis of Su An's residence's fifth young master. Duan Yu's mouth twitched as he kindly reminded, it's that person who smashed the back of someone's head with a super large flower pot in that long corridor. Yes. You're the one who smashed the back of my head. Don't think of denying it. Hu Yukong bellowed with a flushed face. Low chuckles rang out at the banquet. Duan Yu turned his head away, unable to bear to watch. Chapter 541. When he told her about the flower pot in the long corridor, Arbor immediately remembered. So it's you, this coward. What else can you do besides tattletale? The little stoic's eyes abruptly flared up in anger, and she kicked Hu Yukong in the stomach, sending him tumbling out and crashing into Situ Yi's low table with a crash. Situ Yi hastily jumped up to dodge, only to see that unlucky guy pressing down on that table and tumbling to the ground with the table. Hu Yukong's entire body was pressed down by the overturned table, and his legs trembled outside the table. Family head Qin's mouth gaped open. Although he had heard the servants report the formidable aspects of the second young master's valiant maidservant, hearing was one thing, seeing it with his own eyes was another. You. Situ Yi pointed at our dear Xiao Mu and said with certainty, you are little junior sister. Don't deny it. You. Come here right now. Quickly come here. Arbor glanced at him and pattered to him. Situ Yi pulled her to his side and raised his hand to rub her head. He was both speechless and earnest as he said, little junior sister, why are you so disobedient? Where did you run off to these past 2 years? Do you know that everyone was looking for you? How could you disappear just like that and suddenly play the act of completely disappearing? You really made everyone worried sick. Immobilize. Arbor suddenly took out a talisman and slapped it on Situ Yi's forehead. That yellow talisman paper floated on the forehead of the handsome youth with dashing eyebrows and bright eyes. Everyone. Duan Yu was especially speechless as the corner of his mouth kept twitching. This child really didn't change at all. As long as she found it noisy, she would immediately use a strange method to make you quickly shut up. Situ Yi's brows twitched, and he reached out to remove the talisman floating on his face. He looked helplessly at the stoic face. Little junior sister. Senior brother is saying this for your own good. Don't be impatient and don't be silent. Only by talking can we know what happened in the past 2 years. Senior brother Situ, your cultivation base has risen again. Arbor sighed and looked regretfully at Situ Yi. Her cultivation had also soared once, but she still couldn't stop him. Prince Mo watched darling Qiao from afar. Although he didn't say anything, his grip on the wine glass tightened subconsciously. When? The little fellow's relationship with Situ Yi was already this good. By calling him senior brother Situ, he was admitting his identity. When facing him, the little thing, who had been expressionless and trying its best to distance itself from him, had actually so readily acknowledged Situ Yi? The anger in Prince Mo's heart was surging, with nowhere to go. Duan Yu's expression was also unsightly as he stared at Situ Yi from head to toe. He didn't think this guy was better looking than him. The little stoic didn't even acknowledge him, so why did she acknowledge Situ Yi first? Huh? Why did he feel such a strong killing intent? Situ Yi was confused. Come here. Prince Mo spoke. Situ Yi glanced in Prince Mo's direction and saw the Crown Prince's eyes brimming with a terrifying fury. His gaze was chillingly fixed on the hand that was stroking little junior sister's head. Situ Yi sheepishly withdrew his hand and elbowed the little stoic. His Highness the Crown Prince is calling you over. Your Highness. Young Sir Omega Kotoku suddenly stood up and quickly walked to Arbor. He bowed at Prince Mo. This one was lax in disciplining my maidservant. I am willing to bear all responsibility. Chapter 542. Monstrous fury surfaced in Prince Mo's eyes. Bang! The wine cup in his hand turned into fine powder and flew away with the wind. Bear responsibility? Where did this scoundrel come from? Pretending to be a protector, he actually wanted to bear all the responsibility for his baby? Then what about him? What did he, Mo Lien, count as? The Crown Prince was enraged. Qin Guilu's eyebrows twitched, and he suppressed some anxiety in his heart. That person said that as long as the Crown Prince arrived, he could immediately take action. Why was there no sign of him taking action yet? Judging from the Crown Prince's towering rage, he probably wouldn't be able to stay in the Qin estate for long. Come, hurry and change His Highness the Crown Prince's wine cup. Young Master Omega Kotoku calmly instructed, his cold gaze sweeping over his subordinates. Sensing that the atmosphere was completely off, his subordinates scrambled to get wine cups. No need for such trouble. Prince Mo abruptly stood up and walked down the steps, approaching Arbor. What to do? He seemed to be very, very angry. Our dear Qiao Mu was inexplicably flustered and vexed. She looked at her 2 little fingers in a daze, and her small head unconsciously drooped down. She had grown fat from eating her words in these 2 years. He had reason to be angry. She said that she would return to the capital to see him. At that time, he had smilingly agreed and said that he would wait for her. Moreover, the ferule he had given her had broken, and Big Treasure was dead. She couldn't even keep a single one of the gifts she had given him. She was truly too useless. She was a little jinx who would bring misfortune to anyone who approached her. She wasn't very suitable to be by his side. Come back with me. Seeing her silent and small figure huddled behind Omega Kotoku, the Crown Prince's heart twitched for no reason, and it tightened painfully. He reached out to grab her wrist. In the next instant, his hand was blocked by young Master Omega Kotoku. Your Highness, young Master Omega Kotoku emphasized, this is this humble one's maidservant. Your Highness, please conduct yourself with dignity. Who are you? How dare you speak without thinking in front of us? When did she become yours? She never was. A murderous intent flashed through Prince Mo's eyes. He immediately stretched out his hand and slapped the Omega Kotoku's head without thinking. Your Highness, please calm down. Please forgive my unfilial son for his rudeness, Your Highness. Qin Guelu shouted as his body trembled. When Mo Lian's palm smacked down, he sensed that it was somewhat obstructed by a rather powerful cyclone. This guy's defensive barrier was quite strong. Mo Lian's phoenix eyes contained a bit of killing intent as she coldly swept her gaze over Qin Xian's face. When their gazes met, monstrous waves surged in the depths of their eyes. Prince Mo immediately raised his guard and coldly glanced at the Omega Kotoku. When I first met darling Qiao, you were still nowhere to be found. Get out of my way. Mo Lian angrily shoved the Omega Kotoku before scooping up a certain dazed person and bringing her to her side. Let's go. Prince Mo angrily grabbed the little fellow's wrist and turned around to leave, dragging her along. His fingers were like an iron clamp around her wrist, so how could she struggle free? Our dear Qiao Mu blindly followed him to the entrance of the antechamber, where she saw a crowd of madams and young misses standing nearby and looking at each other from afar. Originally, the female guest lounge wasn't far away, so they all came out of the female guest lounge out of curiosity when they heard the commotion and saw this scene with their mouths agape. Mom, who is this bitch? Why is the crown prince grabbing her hand? Mu Qianqian's face paled as she glared at Arbor in disbelief. How could this be? The crown prince had never liked to interact with women, so why was he grabbing that bitch's hand so tightly and not letting go? Chapter 543. All the female guests were currently peeping at the crown prince's entourage and whispering to each other when they suddenly heard a blood-curdling scream. Help! Help! A young man's trembling voice approached from afar. Ow! A terrifying roar deafeningly traveled in from outside the reception pavilion for female guests, scaring all the madams and young misses into retreating to the sides. The reception pavilion's door was smashed to the ground with a boom. A young man in disheveled clothes rolled in and fell at the feet of a madam. He didn't care about anything else and wanted to hug the other madam's leg. Help, help! Help! That madam was so frightened by this impetuous little bastard that she continuously retreated, her eyes filled with rage from embarrassment. When Arbor heard this person's voice, her two small brows twitched slightly. Although this person was extremely frightened at this moment, she could still recognize from this voice that this person was the man who had secretly eaten with concubine Mei in the middle of the night. Ah, young master cousin, some of the maidservants exclaimed. Only then did Arbor understand that this disheveled young man with a flat nose and a round face was Madame Qin Nei Yang's treasured nephew, Ong Jiazhen, who was stained with misdeeds. What was laughable was that he impatiently sought out his uncle's concubine to secretly eat and even kept his aunt in the dark. It was truly so disgusting that it made people want to vomit. Ow! Another half-naked woman with disheveled hair pounced in from the door. However, she couldn't be called a woman anymore. Her skin had already been replaced by pieces of black, rotting flesh. Her four limbs crawled on the ground at an extremely fast speed, and she entered the reception pavilion in the blink of an eye. Black vortexes flickered in her eyes, and her lifeless eyes stared fixedly at her target, Yang Jiazhen. Grinding her sharp teeth, she opened her mouth slightly to reveal the signature product of a zombie, fangs. Oh my god! Why is it a zombie? The hall was filled with chaotic screams, and the ordinary madams and young misses were truly so shocked that they turned pale and screamed continuously. Don't be nervous, everyone, don't be nervous. Calm down and don't run around recklessly. Don't come into contact with this zombie. Qin Guelu was simply about to cry from anger. What the fuck was going on? Why were there so many things happening at his 60th birthday banquet out of the blue? Who could stand up and tell him why there was a zombie in his house? Now that the entire Guanlan city was under martial law day and night, not to mention zombies, even a mosquito wouldn't be allowed into the city. If news of a corpse puppet appearing in the Qin estate were to leak out, it was unknown how many people would be concerned about it. Perhaps the entire Qin estate would be implicated. Could it be that this was the plan that the Lord had in mind? Letting a zombie in to wantonly attack Crown Prince Mo. Would it work? He didn't look reliable at all. "Uncle, save me. Uncle, save me." Young Jiazhen was only wearing half of his pants, and half of his foot was broken, as if he had been viciously bitten by a zombie. Young Jiazhen was about to go crazy. He wailed bitterly, and his clothes were disheveled as he crawled toward Qin Guelu, causing the unmarried maidens to spit several times in embarrassment and cover their eyes with their hands. "He's been bitten." A few of the young masters cried out in horror. "Quick, isolate him, don't let him come over." "Uncle, save me. Uncle, uncle. Aunt, where are you, aunt? Ah, save me. Save me." Roar. That zombie suddenly attacked and pounced on young Jiazhen's back. Chapter 544. An inhumanly large hole opened in the zombie's enormous mouth, revealing two long fangs that abruptly pierced into young Jiazhen's neck and kept biting. Young Jiazhen let out a series of wretched cries. Qin Guelu's pupils constricted several times, and he blocked his two sons beside him. "Don't go over. Don't go over. Humph. You only have yourself to blame." Arbor suddenly spoke coldly and mockingly glanced at young Master Young Jiazhen, who was lying on the ground and being bitten by the zombie. If she didn't guess wrongly, this zombie was the young lady from a good family that young Jiazhen had abducted from the jewelry store. She was about to get married, but he bullied her and insisted on forcibly taking her for his own use. After this young lady died, she mutated into a zombie and turned around to seek revenge on him. Truly, karma was very unpleasant. Serves him right. He just deserved to die. Be careful, be careful. She's coming over. Everyone, concentrate your mystic energy and attack. Family head Qin roared angrily and was the first to release a burst of mystic energy, which bombarded the ground beneath the zombie's feet. That zombie's movements were abnormally swift, so fast that it slightly surprised everyone present. "Little junior sister, how is this zombie so fast?" Situ Yi felt that his little junior sister truly had talent in dealing with zombies. He asked without hesitation, completely not noticing the crown prince's serene gaze. "This is a level 4 zombie and already has some intelligence. Look, she can even seek revenge on her enemies." Arbor reflexively answered Situ Yi's question. Level 4 zombies move faster than normal people. If they bite a level 5 mystic cultivator, they can obtain a portion of their energy and reach the level of a level 3 mystic cultivator at least. What? Everyone turned pale with fright when they heard this. They completely didn't expect that zombies could obtain energy from mystic cultivators. Was this freaking zombie trying to defy the heavens? Don't get bitten by it. Otherwise, the incubation period after infection would not exceed 5 days, and the body would mutate. Even immortals can't save you, Arbor said indifferently, but everyone shuddered. "Uncle, uncle, uncle, save me." Young Jiazhen, who had a bloody hole in his neck and was struggling to crawl forward with one hand covering the wound, cried bitterly and reached out a bloody hand. Qin Guelu clenched his fists. Suddenly, a surge of mystic energy exploded from his entire body, instantly shattering young Jiazhen, who had crawled to his side, into a pile of minced meat. Family head Qin is so bold. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They were afraid that Qin Guelu would lose his mind and insist on keeping that scourge young Jiazhen alive. Everyone concentrated their firepower on the 4th grade zombie. The female corpse puppet moved very quickly. She lay on the ground and jumped up from time to time, causing the madams and young ladies to scream in fright. Fortunately, These useless women were protected by guards. Seeing that there were so many people, the zombies did not pounce on them. This undead hag already had some intelligence. Instead, she fled towards the window. Don't let her escape. Kill her. Chin Guelu's entire body was drenched in cold sweat. He chased after her from the side with several great mystic cultivators. Several streaks of mystic energy crisscrossed and landed on the zombie's back, and the half-hanging corpse immediately fell from the window. Qin Xian raised his sword and chopped off the zombie's head on the spot. It rolled to the feet of a madam, immediately scaring that delicate madam into fainting. Arbor sniffed and suddenly smelled a strange fragrance in the air. His heart abruptly skipped a beat. Hurry and leave, the hall is about to collapse. Chapter 545. Mo Lian's expression changed slightly, and she grabbed the little girl's waist before swiftly dashing out of the hall. The little girl suddenly stuffed a pill into Mo Lian's mouth. Mo Lian was startled for a moment before swallowing it without any hesitation. As soon as they ran out of the antechamber, they heard a loud boom. Sure enough, the entire room collapsed in a matter of seconds, causing dust and rubble to tumble down. Your Highness. Huifeng hastily chased after them. Mo Lian pulled the little girl's hand back several steps before letting go slightly. She raised her sleeve and waved the flying dust in front of her as she coughed softly. The hall in front of them suddenly collapsed, burying everyone in it in an instant. That idiot Mo Jiao also didn't come out. This was really fun. Let's return to the palace first. Mo Lian no longer had the patience to stay in this foul Qin estate, so she reached out to grab the little fellow's soft little hand. Unfortunately, she caught nothing. When she turned around to look, there was no trace of the little fellow. The little fellow must have used that invisibility talisman to escape while he wasn't paying attention. Huifeng glanced around and saw wailing women and young ladies being helped out one after another, each of them looking miserable with their heads covered in dirt and blood. Huifeng turned again and saw the rage that His Highness the Crown Prince was forcefully suppressing in his eyes. He silently lowered his eyes and inwardly grumbled bitterly. Couldn't this little great aunt go along with their lord a little? What the hell was she trying to do? Why did she disappear all of a sudden? Let's see where you can run to. Mo Lian clenched her fists as she turned around and strode away. Huifeng quickly followed without a word. At this time, he didn't want to casually open his mouth and become cannon fodder for no reason. Arbor had used an invisibility talisman to escape. Firstly, she didn't know what kind of mood to face that terrifying guy right now. Secondly, there was something wrong with that fragrance, so she had to go over and take a closer look. The Crown Prince wouldn't want to beat her again, right? She was already an adult. If that guy dared to hit her again, she wouldn't let him off. There was a pair of small wings flapping in front of him. The black butterfly was fleeing very quickly, flying high and low in the air. Arbor's speed wasn't slow either, but it kept a certain distance from him. The butterfly left the Qin estate and flew out of the bustling streets. It fluttered into a desolate road and flew into a dilapidated courtyard. Well done. Tomorrow morning, he will definitely be poisoned without anyone knowing. He he he. A wretched laughter sounded in the small courtyard. Really? Are you that confident? A cold female voice suddenly broke the silence in the courtyard. That person suddenly turned his head, his large and small eyes widened in shock as he stared blankly at the little girl who had just stepped into the courtyard. Arbor's cold gaze fell on him. This person was a dwarf and was extremely short. She had never seen him before. He had a triangular head and an extremely ugly appearance. The main thing was that his eyes were big and small, and his eyebrows were one high and one low. His entire face looked extremely unbalanced, and it stung her eyes. Stinky girl, there's a path to heaven but you don't want to take it. There's no door to hell but you insist on barging in. Since you've come, then stay here. The dwarf's expression was sinister as he abruptly stretched out his hand. Countless black-winged butterflies flew out of his sleeves and swarmed toward Arbor in unison. You dare to show off your insignificant skills in front of me. Arbor sneered and waved her sleeves, sending out a wave of medicinal powder. The group of black butterflies in the air desperately flapped their wings and fell down together. Chapter 546. You're actually a poison master. The dwarves cried out in alarm and abruptly opened their palms, releasing a black smoke in front of Arbor. You dare to harm people with your level of poison? Arbor coldly shouted and abruptly dodged the poisonous smoke. The dwarf's eyes contained a poisonous glint, and he cackled strangely, "Little miss, you're still too inexperienced. Do you think that you can dodge my poisonous smoke as you please? From the moment I released the poisonous smoke, the sky above this area has already been permeated with poisonous smoke, ha ha ha." Halfway through his words, the dwarf suddenly clutched his chest and widened his eyes in horror. He abruptly rolled on the ground and started to convulse. A layer of frost swiftly covered his face and limbs, and even his eyebrows were frozen. His lips kept trembling, and he couldn't speak due to the terror in his eyes. "You're about to die," Arbor icily said as she brandished a shiny dagger. "Guess how many bloody holes I'll poke in your body before you identify the mastermind." The dwarf's originally hideous face was now completely distorted. He glared angrily at Arbor, and his teeth chattered as they made gurgling sounds. "Are you very curious as to why you were poisoned?" Arbor lightly tapped the dwarf's face twice with the dagger in her hand, and her lips curled into an icy arc. "You can go to King of Hell's palace and ask for a clear answer. Speak, which stinking ditch is Shantian Prefecture's Luigi hiding in?" "Ah." The dwarf hesitated for a second before two bloody holes appeared on his body. His entire body convulsed as he looked on helplessly as this she-devil carried him into the rear courtyard as though she was carrying a bag of trash. On a row of walls in the backyard, countless thin cocoons were hanging. They were shivering softly in the wind. "It seems that the poison-tailed butterflies you nurtured are already quite effective. What do you say if I feed you to them?" Arbor icily spoke without the slightest warmth in her eyes. "And no, I'll speak, I'll speak." The dwarf's eyes revealed terror, and his lips trembled as he said, The one who's been in contact with me is Sir Chio-san. I only know that he's currently hiding inside Bailon City's Bailon fortification. It wasn't far from the capital. As for the exact address, I really don't know." "Chio-san." Arbor recalled the familiar voice that had been plotting with Chin Guelu that night, and an idea occurred to him. "It's Luigi's lackey." Yes. The dwarf said with a trembling voice, "Lord Chio-san is very angry. They said that Northern Prince Mo has caused the people of Shantian Prefecture to be unable to survive these past few years. We must retaliate. In that case, Chin Guelu has indeed colluded with your Shantian Prefecture." Arbor's eyes were instantly dyed with traces of frost and snow. "Chin Guelu is very, very careful. He and Shantian Manor have never exchanged any letters. If young Miss wants to accuse him of colluding with Shantian Manor to murder His Highness the Crown Prince, I'm afraid it will be very difficult. Chin Guelu murdered the heir apparent of a kingdom for merely a few pill recipes," Arbor said coldly as he pulled the dagger out of the dwarf's body. "The Chin estate has already reached its end." Slap! The dagger was flung out and shot at the wall. Immediately, the cocoon on the wall exploded with a bang. A swarm of black poison-tailed butterflies flew out and gathered into a thick mass, neatly wrapping around the dwarf. The dwarf howled in pain among the poison-tailed butterflies. "I already said it." Ah. I don't think I said it before. If you confess honestly, I'll spare your life." Arbor replied with an indifferent expression. When he turned around, his gaze landed coldly on the black figure that swooped down from the sky. Less than an hour later, Arbor successfully returned to the Qin estate. She secretly snuck into Qin Guilu's study and found nothing, as expected. Qin Guilu, this old fox, had already erased everything that he had done. She returned to her room and lay down with her clothes on. She seemed to vaguely see Omega Kotoku's figure swaying outside. He raised his hand to knock on the door, but seeing that she had already turned off the lights, he seemed to give up. The little fellow was a bit frightened after being tormented for the entire day, and she fell into a deep sleep as soon as her head hit the pillow. Chapter 547. She slept very well that night. Unlike usual, she wasn't woken up by the slightest noise. Arbor opened her eyes and felt refreshed. Her breathing was long. But she blinked and rolled over, wrapped in a thick brocade quilt. She stared dumbfoundedly at the thick, bright yellow muslin that fell from above her head. This large bed made of agarwood that was several feet wide was clearly not the one she had in the Qin estate. She raised her hand to touch it. The bright yellow canopy was woven with gold silk and inlaid with jade beads. 2 translucent white jade pendants swayed gently. And this brocade quilt of hers? The little fellow stretched out her small hand from the quilt with a dumbfounded expression. She checked her surroundings and sat upright with the quilt wrapped around her. What was going on? The dazzling candlesticks were set up every 5 steps, and the red candles were brightly lit. Rows of fist-sized luminous pearls hung from the 4 corners. The inner walls of the room were carved with white jade. At a glance, the inside and outside of the room were bright and clear. It was so spacious that it made one dumbfounded. This? How was this a side room? Wasn't this a luxurious palace? What was going on? Why did the Qin estate's side room change into an unfamiliar bedroom after waking up? Was there anyone who could tell her what was going on? Arbor hopped off the bed barefoot and ran a few steps. She lifted the heavy bead curtains and looked back. After running all the way, she had only just run out of the vicinity of the bed. Is there anyone here? Arbor threw the brocade quilt on the ground and ran to the treasure pavilion to rummage through her clothes in a short-sleeved inner garment. Xiao Yao led a row of palace maids in. When she came in with neatly arranged clothes, she was stunned to find her little master rummaging through something in front of the treasure pavilion. Our dear Xiaomu turned her head and saw Xiao Yao. Her eyes lit up, and she coughed awkwardly. I am looking for clothes. Xiao Yao couldn't help but laugh out loud. Her little master was rummaging through clothes in the treasure pavilion. Master, you're finally back. Xiao Yao was already a big girl. She hadn't seen Arbor for many years. She was a little emotional when she saw it again. Xiao Yao. The little fellow played with his 2 small hands and ran forward. He wanted to take the clothes, but the palace maid who was holding the clothes stepped aside and bowed in fear. Master, which one do you want to wear? Xiao Yao bent down to help her put on her shoes first, and then pulled her to sit down and dress up. If you don't like anything, Xiao Yao will ask someone to prepare it. Arbor glanced over and saw dozens of girls holding clothes in their hands. She was dazzled. Whatever. Since when was she so particular? He casually pointed at the first girl. That can't be done casually. If Master is unhappy, His Highness will be angry. Xiao Yao smiled as she combed Ji Yunshu's messy black hair. She knew that her little mistress didn't care for a head full of jewels and jades, so she only took 2 light and delicate beads to decorate her hair. Arbor reached out and touched her small face that was so ordinary that it couldn't be found in a pile of embarrassing people. This is the Eastern Palace. Waking up in the palace, even a fool would know what happened in the middle of the night. The little fellow secretly ground her teeth. No wonder she slept so well. The crown prince must have drugged her again and secretly carried her back to the palace. Bastard! Where's that bastard? This baby wasn't happy. Xiao Yao put down the comb, and her small hand stiffened. She coughed lightly and said, His Highness has to meet with officials in the South Study at this time. He'll be back a little later. Humph. I also have things to do. Xiao Mu casually picked up a robe that a palace maid was holding and put it on. She was about to walk out of the bedroom. Unfortunately, before she could take 2 steps, she was pushed back by a strong force. Her small mouth gaped open, and the little fellow reached out to hold her head in shock. Arbor focused her eyes and saw that the entire bedroom was surrounded by an abnormal airflow. It was like a soft and transparent cover, wrapping her inside. Xiao Yao covered her mouth and snickered. Little master, don't bother. You won't be able to leave. His Highness was worried that you would secretly run away again, so he temporarily placed a restriction on your body. Don't worry, it'll be fine as long as His Highness is back. Arbor. I'm worried. It's over. I'm going to sleep early today. I only slept for 4 hours yesterday. Life is hard. Chapter 548. It would have been fine if Xiao Yao didn't mention it, but now that she did, Arbor's pitiful little heart became unsettled and uneasy. Arbor reached out to pull Xiao Yao over. This young lady was now a tall and voluptuous young lady of 17 or 18 years old. She had a rosy goose-egg face and a pair of smiling eyes that were very lively. Little master, if you have any instructions, feel free to tell Xiao Yao, Xiao Yao said with a chuckle. Xiao Yao, can't I go out for a walk? It was rare for the sky to clear up, and it was her first time returning to the palace, so why couldn't she go out for a stroll? Xiao Yao shook her head like a rattledrum. That won't do, little master. You also saw it. His Highness set up layers of energy to surround the bedchamber. His Highness didn't give you the right to pass through, so you can't go out. This is a defensive barrier, right? Don't think that she didn't know what this thing was. Our dear Xiao Mu secretly ground her sharp teeth. She had seen Fan Qiuhe use this kind of large-scale defensive barrier in the past. It could instantly envelop several people or even more than a dozen people inside and resist external impacts. The defensive barrier's effect was comparable to that of a defensive mystic artifact. The difference was that the defensive barrier created by a defensive mystic artifact only had a defensive effect at best. But a defensive barrier created by a person was different. Being inside someone else's defensive barrier meant that your every move and every frown and smile would be in the eyes of the person who set up the barrier. As long as he wanted to, he could constantly pay attention to your every move. Of course, a person's defensive barrier couldn't be maintained for a long time. Ordinary little mystic cultivators couldn't create a defensive barrier at all. After all, how long it could be maintained and how strong its defensive power was closely related to the person's cultivation. If the mystic energy was exhausted, the defensive barrier would naturally disappear. However, the Crown Prince's actions left her speechless. He set up a defensive barrier for no reason, just to confine her from leaving. He didn't forget to set up a defensive barrier when he was discussing politics with someone in the southern study to constantly observe her movements. Didn't this consume his mystic energy? In addition, the defensive barrier that he had set up was extremely large. It had already enveloped an entire sleeping chamber. In that case, it would consume even more energy. Only, he did not know. Where had his cultivation reached? This kind of behavior of casually opening a large-scale defensive barrier was so willful that it made one's hair stand on end. Xiao Yao awkwardly laughed twice. She also felt that His Highness was too nervous. Little Master was already in the Eastern Palace. Where else could he run to? Entering and exiting the palace required an identity token. If he didn't give her the token, how could the Little Master leave? There were tens of thousands of imperial guards patrolling the inner palace. They were not just for show. The chances of the young master sneaking out of the palace were too small. If Arbor knew what Xiao Yao was thinking, he would definitely snort at her. If I use an invisibility talisman, they won't be able to see me even if I sneak up to them. Not everyone's cultivation is higher than this baby's. As long as she was careful and avoided those with top-notch cultivation, how could ordinary guards stop her? Just as the two were talking, Xiao 11Z walked in with a group of people carrying large chests. Arbor widened his eyes and stared straight at Xiao 11Z and company. Xiao 11Z and company hastily went forward to salute and said respectfully, "Miss, His Highness said that if Miss feels bored, you can read these medical books to relieve your boredom." Chapter 549. A quarter of an hour ago. The old physician in charge of the Imperial Physician Building was sprawled on top of an official box. Both his hands were tightly hugging the box that was under his body. Tears and snot were streaming down his face as he said, "No, no. You can't take these books away. You can't take a single book away. Imperial Physician Chow, I'm just borrowing them for a few days. I'll return them to you later." Xiao 11Z directed the people to move the boxes out. "No. Many of these medical books are hand-copied and limited edition books. There's only one of them, so I won't lend them to you. I can't lend them to you. If they're damaged, who am I going to ask for them?" Imperial Physician Chow held Xiao 11Z's leg tightly. "Return them to me, return them to me." Xiao 11Z's mouth twitched as he pulled his leg away, shouting, "Stop, stop. Imperial Physician Chow, where are your manners? This eunuch is under His Highness' orders to borrow your medical books to read for 2 days. I'll return them in a few days. You old fellow, stop making a fuss." Seeing the boxes being carried away before his eyes, Imperial Physician Chow's eyes rolled back, and he was about to faint after taking a deep breath. The nearby Imperial physicians quickly rushed over and patted the old physician's chest to soothe his breathing. "Old Imperial Physician Chow, old Imperial Physician Chow." Xiao 11Z hurriedly waved at the group of people, and they ran away with the boxes, leaving the Imperial Physician Building in a sorry state. They left behind a group of hopping physicians who were shouting furiously. Imperial Physician Chow's tears streamed down. "Help me change my clothes, woo-woo. I'm going to lodge a complaint." At this moment, the little girl looked at the dozen or so boxes of books, then raised her head to look in a certain direction in the bedchamber and snorted. The Crown Prince must be secretly observing her. Otherwise, why could the palace maids and eunuchs enter and leave freely, but she couldn't? She stuck out a little finger and poked lightly. A ripple of energy appeared at the bedchamber's door, sucking her finger in and slowly flicking it away. Humph. Bad person. Inside the South Study Room. The group of officials quietly raised their heads and secretly glanced at His Highness. They discovered that the corners of His Highness's lips were slightly raised, and there was actually a hint of a smile in his eyes. This was something that was rarely seen in a few years. The official who had just reported a piece of bad news and was waiting for His Highness to scold him was dumbfounded. His Highness the Crown Prince didn't get angry. Instead, he calmly gave a few pointers and asked if there was anything else, then had them all withdraw. A few officials who were used to being scolded by His Highness, after coming out of the South Study, expressed that they were not used to it and were unable to accept it. "Lord Song, don't be at your wits' end. From the Crown Prince's words, I believe that he will personally make a trip to Bailon. I heard that the first batch of seeds has already grown into vegetables. As long as we can grow something, even if it's slow, the bitter days will pass." Just now, the Minister of Revenue, Song Yuan, reported to His Highness that there had been no harvest in the Mo Kingdom capital recently, and the situation was very grim. There were also practically no clean non-mutated fish or prawns to be found in the nearby rivers. If this continued, the grain in the granary would run out in half a year. He originally thought that Her Highness would be annoyed and give him a scolding. However, Lord Song was not scolded. This was too surprising. Setting aside the barren lands in the west, compared to the many countries in the east and south, our northernmost grain reserves can already be considered very sufficient. An official sighed and said, if not for Her Highness' foresight, it wouldn't be too much to say that there would be starving people in the entire capital every day, and tens of thousands of corpses would be piled up. Everyone nodded repeatedly and walked out in discussion. Chapter 550. Mo Lien closed the document in her hand and stood up to walk outside. Xiao 11Z wasn't present, so another young eunuch quickly followed behind the crown prince. Young aunt. The crown prince's footsteps paused, and he tossed him a piece of paper. Order the meal to be served according to the menu. The crown prince was suddenly being particular. Young Lu Zi was a bit confused, and he followed with small steps. Your Highness, order the meal to be served in the bedchamber. Mo Lien responded and waved his hand to have him leave. Then, he strode quickly towards his bedchamber. A moment later, she arrived at the entrance of the bedchamber. She waved her hand to dismiss the palace maids who were waiting to salute, then quietly walked inside. The little fellow was hugging a small jar of dried fruit and sitting on the brocade couch by the window. There was a thick medical book on her knees, and she would occasionally flip through a few pages. Xiao Yao, who was quietly standing to the side, raised her head to see him enter. She hurriedly wanted to salute him. Mo Lien reached out to stop her, and with an indifferent glance, Xiao Yao quietly bowed and left the bedchamber, leaving the large space for the two masters. Arbor was engrossed in reading, and her small hand unconsciously picked up a piece of dried fruit and nibbled on it. The vast amount of medical knowledge in her mind overlapped with that in the book. She discovered that many of the medicinal herbs in the book only had different names from the ones in her mind, but their usage were more or less the same. In fact, the things that appeared in her mind from time to time were much more accurate and effective. She had definitely accumulated a large amount of medical knowledge in the past, so there was basically no need to doubt this. After her death in her previous life, until her rebirth, during this period of time. What exactly happened? Was it during this period of time that she learned medical skills from Master? A thought flashed through her mind, and she suddenly sensed a familiar aura approaching. The little fellow abruptly raised her head, and the thick book in her hand had already been taken away by someone. The crown prince was dressed in formal attire, and his long hair was tied up with a crown. He looked a bit different from his usual plain clothes, and there was a hint of sharpness between his exquisite brows. What are you doing? Darling Qiao would get angry whenever she saw him. He had locked her in the room without saying a word, and now that he was back, he was provoking her and snatching her book without any explanation. Mo Lien threw the book to the ground and reached out to lift her up from behind. He whispered in her ear, "Don't you have anything to say to me?" Just as the little fellow stretched out his hand, it was firmly held by him. His entire body was wrapped up by his tyrannical aura, and he couldn't move at all. His little face immediately became a little angry. "In the past 2 years, did you miss me?" His head gently pressed against her slender neck, and he slowly nudged her. Xiao Mu's intuition told her that this fellow was angry, and her entire body stiffened. "Do you want to?" How could he not? When she thought about how his faint, smoke-like figure on the snowy peak had blocked the attack for her and disappeared with a bang, she felt extremely uncomfortable in her heart. She unconsciously bit her pink lips. "Forget it, I don't want to know." He whispered into her ear and tightened his arms around her waist, pulling her firmly into his embrace. "Mo. Amen. Let's eat first. Are you hungry?" He suddenly hugged her and stood up, calling for someone to bring in the food as if there was no one else present. A dozen dishes for 2 people was already extremely extravagant in today's world. Although his expression was as gentle as jade, his actions were elegant, and he attentively picked up food for her to eat. But Arbor felt uncomfortable in his heart. Chapter 551. This person was clearly suppressing a bellyful of anger, but he didn't say anything. It was so annoying to look at. Just say what you have to say. Arbor tossed her chopsticks and said angrily, "I'm not eating anymore." The two royal maids who were accompanying them abruptly glared. They had never seen anyone who dared to be so impudent in front of the crown prince. "Rest if you're not eating." Mo Lien stood up and silently tossed his chopsticks aside. He reached out to grab her small hand. The little stoic was instantly enraged. She wanted to fling his hand away but failed. Her eyes were brimming with anger. "You're ridiculous." Crown Prince Mo gazed at her silently. The more he was like this, the angrier the little stoic became. She turned around and ran out of the bedchamber. Mo Lien's figure flashed, and he instantly blocked her path. The little fellow ran without thinking and bumped into his arms. "Where are you going? You still want to return to the Qin estate? Are you that reluctant to part with that Omega Kotoku?" Mo Lien instantly flew into a rage. He hugged her and turned her small face to face him. Why did he mention Omega Kotoku for no reason? Arbor struggled with her small arms and legs, but how could she break free? She angrily punched him. "I'm telling you, the Qin estate has already been surrounded. The houses collapsed and so many officials' families were injured. A dangerous level 4 zombie also appeared in the estate. Right now, all of them are under observation. Not a single one can come out." The crown prince grabbed her small chin and stared straight into her black and bright eyes. He roared angrily, "We encountered an assassin in their Qin estate, and Mo Jiao's head was also smashed open. Attacking the royal family is unforgivable. We must confiscate their Qin family." "Fine, we'll confiscate it. Why are you yelling at me?" Our dear Qiao Mu was extremely angry and kicked him. His Highness was used to this signature kick, so he didn't mind it at all. However, the surrounding royal maids and eunuchs were all scared witless, and they lowered their heads and prostrated themselves on the ground. "You're not worried?" Mo Lien's expression eased slightly. "What do I have to worry about? You speak eccentrically all day long. If you're angry, just let it out. Don't hold it in." Arbor angrily kicked him a few times, leaving a row of small footprints on his robe. Mo Lien was instantly angered to the point of laughter. Carrying the little thing in her arms, she parted the curtains and walked into the inner room. She coldly said, "All of you, leave. Shouldn't I be angry?" He threw her onto the soft brocade on the side of the bed and leaned in close, his breath completely enveloping her. "You didn't leave a single word behind and ran away for more than 2 years without saying a word. When we met again, you were already in the Qin estate. That damned Omega Kotoku. Was he even worthy of being her protector?" I. Arbor immediately withered. The little fellow knew that she was in the wrong, but she still couldn't help but say, "Then don't blame me." Mo Lien laughed angrily. "How am I weird? You're obviously so angry that you can't wait to beat me up, but you still look like you're bathing in the spring breeze. Isn't it uncomfortable to hold it in? Oh, so you're saying that even if I don't hit you, you'll still remember. Alright then, let's fight." He suddenly reached out and pressed her down on his long legs. Darling Qiao was immediately stupefied. "What? This immoral ghost, is there anyone who cheats people like you?" Seeing his palm fall, Arbor was about to die from anger. Why was she so stupid? Wasn't she asking for a beating? However, in the next second, he flipped her over and hugged her, his warm fingers gently caressing her small face. How could he bear to hit his darling? Chapter 552. You'll be of marriageable age in 3 months, right? He changed the topic too quickly. Darling Xiao couldn't keep up with his pace. Xiao Mu gave a muffled "mm." Her small face was still puffed up with anger as he held her in his arms. Actually, I'm not angry at you. Mo Lien lifted her face and nuzzled her forehead. I'm angry at myself. I couldn't protect you properly. You don't know how much pain and self-reproach I felt when I saw those withered vines and broken trees on the snowy peak, he murmured in her ear. But all of that is in the past now. I don't want to know anything or think about anything. I just want you to stay by my side. From this moment on, don't leave me again. Arbor actually didn't want to argue with him, but for some reason, she felt a bit angry when she saw his gentle mask earlier. Now that the two of them had a heated argument, this little fella felt more at ease. When she heard him say that, her boundless guilt was aroused, and she timidly looked at him and said, sorry. Speaking of which, she was willful in front of him and was used to acting coquettishly. She really couldn't bear the slightest bit of grievance from him. However, his lukewarm attitude just now made her feel aggrieved and gloomy. Arbor's eyes reddened, and she reflexively wrapped her arms around his neck. She pitifully said, Mo Lien, I didn't disappear on purpose. It was just that I felt too bad at that time, so I didn't want to think about anything. Murong Sun is dead, Mo Lien. She originally said she would attend my marriageable age ceremony, but she died. She's a big liar. Mo Lien gently patted her back. When he thought of how helpless she was at that time, his heart couldn't help but ache. Sect Master is dead, and Master is also dead. The pharaoh you gave me broke, and Big Treasure is also dead. They're all dead, and I'm the only one left. Nonsense, how could you be the only one? No matter what, I will always be by your side. Do you understand? Jojo, you have to trust me more, okay? Arbor couldn't help but nod when he saw his focused and expectant eyes. Mo Lien's lips turned up as he stroked her small head in satisfaction. You don't know this, but when I brought your parents to the capital, I didn't even dare to say anything to them. You only lied to them that you were cultivating in the holy water sect. Do you know how much they missed you? But I only know how to harm others. Nonsense. Mo Lien suddenly reached out to cover her small mouth. How can the holy water sex incident be blamed on you? That's because people's hearts aren't what they used to be. Greed causes mischief. It's not your fault. Don't worry. No matter what, we'll get our revenge. Mo Lien hugged her and gently shook her little body. Promise me, baby, don't let your imagination run wild, okay? I'll send you home tomorrow. Are you okay? He cupped her little face and looked at her. Your parents and family all miss you very much. How could anyone reject such an offer? Arbor nodded gloomily. While you're at it, have royal father issue a betrothal edict and send it to your home as well. Prince Mo hugged this baby and approached her with a grin. Okay. His gentle and persuasive tone and his picturesque features made a certain little person nod gloomily. She didn't have time to think about it carefully. Then she abruptly widened her eyes. Betrothal? Who? Mo Lien held back his laughter and tapped her little nose before pointing at himself. You, and me. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.